Welcome, everyone. We're happy to be together here in our Standards Assessment Committee, Utah Board of Education. And my name is Randy Booth. It's my privilege to chair this committee. We have 4 board members currently here, and we're expecting another one to arrive momentarily. Why don't we give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves and what area you represent in our great state. Emily?
I'm going to be speaking about
Jenny Earl. I represent District 1, which is Northern Utah.
First of all,
Natalie?
Good morning. My name is Natalie Klein. I represent District 9 down in the southern end of the Salt Lake County Valley.
Great, thank you. And we will have board member Sarah Reel join us momentarily, and we're happy to have her with us. We welcome all of you that may be listening in, and look forward to several very interesting agenda items that we're going to be considering today. First of all, we would like to recognize some of the outstanding workers for Utah's children here in our state office. I'd like to turn the time over for a moment to Deputy Superintendent Norman, who will introduce 3 individuals who are making significant contributions to the work that we're about here at USPE. Dr. Norman.
Yes, thank you. I want to make sure that we have them online first, and I see we have Michelle Knight. And Michelle, if you can wave, and do we have Tina? And yep, and Shalise, you're here as well. Can you give everyone a wave so that you can see the amazing folks that we're going to be honoring today with this recognition? So this is the best part, is focusing the work, which is the Utah State Board of Education strategic plan. Includes the aim that upon completion, all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. Through this work, we are building structures, professional skills, and students who can ultimately leave our K-12 system with the competencies they'll need to achieve this vision. Many parts of education work together to help students succeed. The AWARE grant will end in September 2023, and we'd like to highlight the work of the AWARE grant today. So the background is in 2018, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, granted Utah a 5-year, $8.4 million grant aiming to build a comprehensive approach to model school-based mental health, to increase mental health literacy and support services to schools and communities. So USPE, in collaboration with behavioral health stakeholders across the state, work to improve mental health awareness and response. The 4 major goals in this project have been: 1, to increase student education on mental wellness; 2, to increase mental health screening for early identification; 3, to increase access to mental health care; and 4, to increase educator training in mental health wellness intervention and crisis response. Throughout the 5-year grant, which ends in September of 2023, Project Aware LEAs, which are Alpine Cache and the LEAs, Alpine Cache and Jordan School District, have signed 19 memorandums of understanding, MOUs, to advance collaboration between schools and community partners. The 3 LEAs reported 93 school policies that have been edited or created to advance wellness and resiliency in education. As part of goal number 4, 38,000 adults have been trained in mental health literacy, suicide prevention, crisis response, and other mental health related topics. In Project Aware, a new partnership was developed with Intermount Healthcare to pilot a return to learn process where school districts could be immediately notified with parent permission of when a child in their school district was seen in the emergency room department for suicidal ideation. The school district then implemented a return to learn protocol for the student's family and the school met to create a plan to support the student both academically and in their behavioral health and well-being. The pilot was successful in Cache School District and Alpine School District and is in process of being expanded to all Project Aware school districts and other Utah LEAs. So again, Michelle and Shalise, if you can wave, and of course, Tina as well. So thank you so much for your contributions and the hard work in getting this grant off the ground, working and to its completion. Thank you.
That's good. Michelle and Tina and Shalise, we have some certificates of recognition for you that we will make sure that you get, and we certainly appreciate work that you put into and continue to put into this important element of mental health for our children across the state. Thank you so much. We're grateful to you. We were just joined by board member Sarah Reel. Sarah, would you like to let our visitors know what area district you are representing?
Yeah, I represent District 5, which is the western part of Salt Lake, South Salt Lake, Murray, and West Valley.
Thank you. All right. We're going to
And I feel like my students that walk into class late with food, and I'm like, oh, I know why you're late.
well, we hope you got some.
Yeah, it is.
Andrea, do we have any public comment today?
We don't. We have a guest, but we don't have it.
All right. We're happy to have Shauna Warnick here, representing USBA Board of Directors and a member of Nebos School District Board of Education. And she often listens to us when we're just on Zoom and is well aware of the work of standards and assessment. So we're happy to have you here in person. Welcome. All right, we're now on item 2.3, which is an action item, the parental exclusion from state assessments form, forms plural for 2023 and 2024. I'm wondering, is Darren on? Darren, would you like to just give us a brief introduction to why we're looking at this and what the recommendation is for this year?
You bet, I'd be happy to. I'm Chair Moss. My name is Darren Nielsen. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning for the Utah State Board of Education. And I also get to have the privilege of working as the Director of the Assessment Accountability Section. Under the requirements of 53G 6803, it includes the following statement that the State Board shall maintain and publish a list of state assessment systems and software that qualify under subsection 9A, and subsection 9A defines what those qualifications are. So at the request of a student's parent, an LEA shall excuse a student from taking an assessment so we're gonna have three different requirements that meet the criteria to be added to this list that or this form that we're gonna be talking about. Is federally mandated, is mandated by the state under this public education code, or requires the use of a state assessment system or software that is provided or paid for by the state. So it's typical that the parental exclusion from state assessment form will come forward to this committee and the full board on an annual basis, just as a result of changes that occur. With the passage of House Bill 477, which essentially eliminated the full-day kindergarten grants and the optional enhanced kindergarten program, which were both programs that were not required by the state, but were optional for LEAs to participate in. Staff are now recommending that the kindergarten entry and exit profile, or KEEP, be added to the elementary state assessments, parental exclusion from state assessments form. The board's considered this in the past and it determined that this assessment didn't meet the criteria of 53 G6 803. Staff believe that that assessment does now meet that criteria. And so the draft that you see on the screen now is recommendation from staff to add that to this parental exclusion form. A secondary request that we have, and one that probably wouldn't be required to come to the state board, but we brought it forward anyway, is this form has become fairly lengthy over time. In fact, I think it's a 6-page form altogether. So staff are recommending that the secondary and the elementary portions of the assessments that qualify for this form be broken into 2 separate forms. And so a parent, for convenience for the parent, if I have a student in an elementary school, I have a form that's very specific to the assessments that I take that my child might experience in that setting. And then if I have a student in the secondary setting, that I would have a form that's specific to that, just convenience sake. So that's our secondary recommendation. And then I'm happy to address questions or support the committee in your discussion about this request. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Deputy Superintendent?
I'll put a motion on them and we can discuss it.
Great.
I would like to make a motion that the committee approve and forward to the full board the parent exclusion form. That's this from state assessment forms. Oh, from state assessment forms, sorry. Anyways, I'll just put that out there for us.
So we have a motion from Vice Chair Earl that the committee approve and forward to the full board the parental exclusion from state assessments forms, both the elementary and the secondary forms that are being divided this year, different from previous years. Are there any questions or any comments that we could direct to staff as we're considering these forms? All right, seeing none, I think we can move right to the vote. All those in favor of approving the parental exclusion from state assessments forms as they've been presented this morning, please raise your hands. And Natalie,
I'm a yes.
thank
I
you
put my
very
check
much.
mark up, but I don't know if you can see it, but I'm a yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We
Just mention it.
okay, that motion passes unanimously with all members of our committee supporting this action. Thank you very much, Darren. We appreciate the work that you and your staff have put into keeping our assessments organized and communicating properly with our parents across the state. We'll now move on to action item 2.4, which is having to do with R277-433 disposal of textbooks in public schools. It's a repeal. And do we have Lise or Carrie here that might be able to give us just a brief introduction of what we're considering?
Not online.
Yes, I was notified that Elise might be 2 minutes late. The committees overlap each other, and so I'm gonna take this for her as well. It's just a simple change that's on here, and it's going to be changing the fact that our LEAs don't have to notify the other education agencies before disposing of the books. There used to be a requirement. It was very tedious and whatnot, and so it repeals that requirement. That's the change.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? First,
Just feel more about this all of my first place.
I can give you what I know of it, because I'm not the lawyer team, so I can tell you that when I was in the school, whenever we had a new textbook adoption, then the requirement was anytime you're disposing of old books that were undamaged, you first had to offer them to every other LEA in your district, and then you had to offer them to any LEA outside of your district. What happened was then you got books that were just everywhere, and sometimes that process was so laborious and they just got stacked up. So behind the reason why that also becomes tedious is the fact that when there's a curriculum change or when there's a standards change, the standard change happens throughout the state. So if one person is changing, like let's say we just passed all of those standards that we did yesterday and the last month, when that standard happens, the entire state is going to be disposing of those old textbooks. And a lot of times now it's digital curriculum, so it's not actually a physical textbook, but everyone's going to be doing it. So then it would take the time of saying, does anyone else want it? And they would say no, because we all have to change. And then you would offer to the state, and the answer is no, because we all have to change. And then they were sometimes they're donated outside of the country after that, or they're able to do other things with them in humanitarian efforts and whatnot. So that's how it was done. So instead of taking that process of you have to, it's kind of more known the fact that the only reason you're changing is because of the updates of standards.
And where is it that show what they can do with those textbooks? If you're getting rid of those, can they, I don't know whether they can sell them or just give them away, what stipulations exist there?
Jennifer's here, she might be able to answer that.
We have, I'm sorry, we were in both meetings at the same time.
To write more.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't have a text.
You get settled.
What is the question?
The textbooks.
What are we doing with them now?
Like
Oh,
what happens
so-
now?
So prior practice is they had to like send the notification to me, we would then share it with our listserv, and then if anybody wanted it, like, oh, you know, this one's for us, and they reach out. Now they can do whatever they want, they might give them big hits, they might throw them in the trash, but honestly, it's a great deal of it. So it is basically saying, before the code said you had to have a do this kind of process, you don't have that anymore, and therefore there's no regulations of how they have to dispose.
So initially, was it maybe perceived as a benefit? That was kind of like a book share kind of a thing?
Yeah, and honestly, like I've been there, we've been doing this since I was 9 years ago, and it wasn't very long use. It's basically when people are getting their textbooks, they're at the end of their life. They're probably over a decade old. The only times they put it together is when people were like, there's one more year till adoption, and we could do with more textbooks because we sometimes have been destroyed in the last decade. That is the place where it was helpful, but it was greater. People actually found them find one of those books to hold them up for another.
On my part, I haven't read this. So are they allowed to donate those? Or, because I know like on our school closure, we were down and built a new school. They could not take anything off of the property. So I'm so personal, but I'm like, there's a lot of good stuff that could be done. This doesn't apply to these books. Okay. So they can be sent out into the world and utilized.
That's probably the biggest way that LEAs do dispose of them is humanitarian. Yes.
May I say something?
Yes.
Well, I'm just trying to remember, we just recently passed a contract, if I'm not mistaken, with a company to dispose of all of the books. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
It was one of the contracts on our consent agenda.
This month,
No, not this month, a
Oh, just
couple months ago.
You remember something, I don't remember correctly.
we'll have to,
Just add it on. It matters to me.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I guess I just see the books as a positive resource and to eliminate waste that comes from the government. Even though they're like millions of dollars, I would rather they not destroyed. Maybe that's what I was searching for. So maybe someone like as we go through the next couple hours, there's somebody to find reports.
Yeah. One of the things in having done this process is disposing of them is usually the very last resort, because one of the things is you have to pay to have them disposed of. It's not, so although we have a contract, you have to, it's a statewide contract for a price, and then they still have to pay to have it done. So nobody, they would much rather, if they're paying for something, pay to have it shipped somewhere so someone else can be using it. But it's a good point. I don't think we have that guardrail. Because we do, yeah.
Board Member Klein, do you remember, was it a contract to dispose of them?
Yes, it was with a company that would dispose of them,
Okay, okay.
which I just think is a really sad thing, to be getting rid of books and going all digital. I think the day will come where we rue the day when there isn't hard copy things anymore, and everything is just shifting sand, because all the digital stuff can change on a dime. It's all dynamic in nature.
Some of these textbooks need to be disposed of. They have variety to cover them. So it's, yeah. So some of them absolutely, but some of them are beautiful books that can be sent and used in areas.
All right, so our understanding is that their first desire would be to use them for humanitarian purposes and to share them with people who might be able to use them, and if not, then they'll be disposed of. And probably the contract that Board Member Klein is reminding us of was a company that would actually destroy or get rid of the books. But there's a price attached to all of those things, whether we're sending them to some other third world country or whether we're disposing of them here with the contract that we recently reviewed.
I know there's a lot of people that are now getting into the realm of home learning or homeschooling. And they helped pay for all of these materials. So I would think it would be a great idea to put them in some kind of warehouse that is open to the public to go and help themselves, or pay very minimal fee to buy them. Like when public libraries get rid of books and they, sell them for a quarter or, something like that.
Board Member Reel.
Isn't it with no regulation though? We get to open the market for LEAs and districts to decide. They could, in some towns, open a warehouse or know a homeschool community, or the idea is more so with their opportunities to do with them what they want. Maybe a school has a family that works with kids in India and they can send them there or whatever, right? So having no regulation actually opens it up for all of these LEAs to decide what they want with them, right?
I think that's what I'm trying to clarify, is you have the answer to that. So, Joseph Brown's Director of Teaching and Learning, Adam Hurd, our Director of Purchasing, said it was a resale and disposal company. So it's a state contract that the LEAs can use to do what whoever I'm speaking to, resell them to people who might be interested, and then books that they're normally sharing that really aren't in a state that they should be resold, they help with the disposal. So that is a contract that did pass, but it is for both resale and disposal.
So they manage the books.
Yeah.
They're managing,
They're
but
the
they'll pick it up, they'll store them, they'll do
they'll-
something with them, and then they'll either dispose of them or.
Or resell them to the.
All right, great. That's good information. Are there any further questions? If not, I would entertain a motion,
I'll make a motion.
please.
Yeah, that the committee repeal R277-433 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Earl. We have you'd like to speak to that motion?
Well, just that the rule itself is only like 3 lines, right? And I think with this contract in place, which I'm glad Board Member Klein remembered that, I vaguely remembered about it, but then I think it does allow districts to dispose in a way that's beneficial. But I do think that there was some burdensome elements, right? We're trying to reduce the burden on our LEAs with trying to have to notify everybody and the inefficiency of that and making it ineffective versus anyways, and other options.
Great. Right, so we have a motion on the floor that the committee repeal R 277-433 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, those opposed, raise your hand.
I'm a no.
Okay, so Board Member Klein and Board Member Green are opposed. And the others are, it passes 3-2.
So let me just ask a question. Is there something in there that you wanted to leave? In that rule?
I just think that we need to put something together that is it says what we want and not just repeal it. Not that I'm, I just think that there's work that could be done on it to make it what we want instead of just repealing it altogether. And I don't have time.
Maybe
for it.
that's,
I haven't
yeah.
prepared anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe bring something before the board if you think
Yeah.
there's some language there. I do think the law removes something, so I'm just proactively saying if there is some way to word that so that it's productive, I think that would be worth the
Yeah.
effort.
And I'm just looking at the policy right now as it stands. For me, I understand it at the level of burden, but I also see it as a quality check on how inventory supply and
There's so many ways to do that is what
You
I'm
know,
saying.
you're
Maybe you two could work together to bring some forward that eliminates whatever was eliminated with the reporting and still be able to do it, so.
Do we have feedback? I know we just asked, did we get feedback from like LEAs, like survey, or where did this start?
So we push this direction, the more burden, trying to get rid of burden. That's where this came from. So it was one of the options that was brought, and then the representative was keeping the more positive in code session. Would take away the requirement for this, but then
The reporting requirement.
correct. That's all that was in code. It was like a one line. I think some kind of the one dictate what that reporting requirement was, and then that was for those. So nothing in code that helped dispose in any particular way, but there was a reporting requirement that there was that. Not saying you couldn't do what you're talking about around like best practices related to Texas disposal. We're not going to go over that tonight. Yeah. So.
Mm.
Good, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to action item 2.5. R 277-469 instructional material operating procedures and amendment. And are you going to speak for Elise and Terry on this?
I have been texting when she's in the building. I'm like, I'm not sure. But she also has to go over and on licensing, so she might just be at the table there. So this one in
Jennifer,
particular.
may I make a request? I don't know if you can, Jennifer, if you could sit the other direction or something, because your voice is just going away and your back is, and I can't hear what you're saying.
Those are the mics. So she's
These
kind of under a mic.
The green glow. Speak towards the green glow.
Try this one. Is that better?
Thank
More
you.
verified?
You hear okay? Go ahead.
Go ahead and I'll let you know if I'm struggling
Thank
still.
you. Thank you. So this one is being updated due to the changes in code in session related to digital materials. So we have the instructional materials. We've always had this commission and the requirements of that commission, but with the changes in 53G 10-206, we needed to update the terms for digital resources. Part of that's just like software is not the only digital resource anymore. It could be digital textbooks, all the things digital. And so that language has been updated to be more current. I'm scrolling, thank you for scrolling. Yeah, I'm looking for any other changes. There is something about there. There was like another consistent with the principles of the line
So-
1. Yes.
So this is for HB 427.
No, well, part of it's for, yes, the 53G, sorry, yes. Just to include that the materials need to be consistent with the principles of HB 427. So making that addition.
Okay, I just have a couple of questions because I noticed on line where the changes were made for digital resources that it's not consistent throughout. I don't know if we can just make that consistent if we have to, because you've got line 40, line 50, line 67 that all refer to digital resources, and they haven't all been updated. Some say digital materials, some say digital resources, and maybe they should all say digital resources and materials, or just pick one or the other.
Yeah, let's do that as a technical cleanup. We'll go through and align the language.
And I noticed on line 104, there's a technical edit as well, where it says
what's on
provided instead of provide, I think.
Okay. Okay, I made note of those so we can make those technical changes. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Board Member Klein. Are there other comments or questions regarding this rule?
I trying to, what line was that? I had a question on. Did I not mark it? Oh, so line 193 and 194. I have issues with this line where it says, what's the lead in, that the instructional materials, when they're considering them, they're looking, are they free from sexual, ethnic, age, gender, or disability bias and stereotyping? The reason I struggle with that is because in one of the instructional review batches that we had to go through and look at how the review commission kind of their summary on different materials. One of the responses to one was that they rejected the material because it was stereotypical in that it only showed a family with a mother and a father, and so they considered it biased and stereotypical. Which, if we made that if that's the criteria, then we're going to lose a huge, the vast majority of good literature if we can only use material that shows other alternative forms of the family. So, and that could, go for a lot of these different areas. It may be that an author lived in one place where they've only ever known one ethnicity, and so that's what they write about. It doesn't mean that they're biased or that they're stereotyping. That's just what they're writing about. And so if everything that we put forward has to show this diversity in every area, we are going to be severely limiting the quality materials that would otherwise be available. And I feel like that's like a reverse discrimination kind of thing. And so I would, and I don't have a recommendation on that right now, but somehow that has got to be clarified so that it's not being used as, it's not being weaponized against the vast majority of literature that we've had throughout time, or materials that are otherwise very good educational materials.
I think you described why I hated House Bill 427. And it's because it leaves these gray areas. It, puts things into boxes. It questions what we're using as materials. And it makes you wonder, is this stereotyping? Is this not stereotyping? It removes that openness and that ability to use all types of materials when we have 427 now passed. So I don't know how to fix this because of that.
Right,
So,
because, we've got people that are, it just becomes really tricky. We put ourselves, I feel like everybody's put ourselves in a box.
It becomes tricky for teachers as well, because they wonder if they're using something that's okay or not okay as well. That's what bothered me about House Bill 427.
Well,
Well-
and yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I was gonna say the fact we have that put into here, and under 2A in that law, it says that no individual is inherently, the following principles of individual freedom, that no individual is inherently racist, sexist, oppressive. Anyways, it goes on. But I think we don't, with that law in place, there is no need for the L, because that is exactly what that's saying, unless I'm wrong. Right? I mean, that's exactly in essence saying the same
Yes.
thing. It's just in law.
Yeah, with the,
Yes.
because L is not new, so with the change to the rule, you really could get rid of L because you've added the individual freedoms connection and not.
He added in the law, so that's, there's not the need for that.
How do you
It's
feel? Is that
duplication.
good? You feel good about just eliminating L entirely since it is referenced to the law?
I think we could do that.
Yeah, and in there, once again, that no person is subject to discrimination or adverse treatment solely or partly on the basis of, and then it lists off several, race, color, national origin, religion, disability, sex, sexual orientation. So it addresses that several times. So
In 427?
important, well, yeah. So I think I would make that amendment to strike L because it's contained in the law. And, oh, that's right.
I do have a question. What other impacts is 427? Like, where else are we gonna see this?
In the core guidance process is coming up next.
Yes, right, okay. I just am wondering, like,
It's not very different than what we had. R277. In our opinion, it's basically just codifying 328 in a lot of ways. And so from a staff perspective, that we're doing a lower training just to make sure all our new staff are up to speed. Because we've been training on our 328 with our team, and then we're also helping the field with resources around how do you review materials and updating our tools, which you'll see with that update in the core guide process. So they can also look at those materials. It's really hard when we pass on over 100 bills for educators to stay up on all of them. So resources the state puts out to say, remember, when you're looking at material selection, in fact, Amber Wright, one of our instructional materials specialists, is putting together resources for how you do local reviews, just as tools for LEAs to consider, because they're really asking for help when they're doing these instructional material reviews, like how do we engage parents? How do we make sure we get to our public board meetings and all of those? So it'll go into the collection of resources as well. So that will be a good opportunity. HB 427 is just a renewed effort of reminding people, if you want to look, when I was in Canyons, we had a curriculum that had anytime there was a student or a child in a book with red hair, they were always like the bully. And so we're like, okay, we need to be a little more aware. Maybe we don't read that story because every time there was a redheaded child, it was a negative stereotype for students. And so those were things that as a district, we said, we're going to pull those stories because every time it was always a negative. There wasn't a balance. Like, yeah, sometimes the redhead kids did it. It was always a negative, and so it was something we had to be clear of.
It's good discussion. Are there any further questions before we entertain a motion?
I do have just one more question. Sorry, and maybe you said this and I missed it. Is the board going to be, or is staff creating a rule around HB 427 that is going to be coming forward that's specifically to that? Or just inserting it here and there where needed?
More of an integration where it's appropriate. Not a separate rule. I don't think that will call for a rule.
Dr. Norman.
And if I might, it R277, 427 is also a restatement of most of what the board put into effect in R277-328. That was actually the foundation of it, in working with the sponsor of the bill, in talking with them. That was the foundation of it. So the board did most of the foundational work that went into the statements and the wording that are in R27 or in statute. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd be happy to entertain
All right, you can motion.
these.
That the committee, the committee approves R 277469, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. And then I
Great.
like amendment. On line, and then just striking line 193 and 194. Which really just means that and would move up, right? Oh, and then any technical changes.
Line 193.
193 and 194.
Those are encompassed.
Just as a point of order in making this, I don't think you have to amend your motion. So you can just make the motion to begin with as amended.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
As amended.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so I just want to make sure you have it clear. As amended, striking lines 193 and 194.
Yes. Okay. And then any technical changes.
Okay.
So I think we needed to update resources, right? Make sure that it was consistently used throughout the document. Digital resources.
Great. Would you like to speak to that?
No, I just think it's consistent.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to approve R 277-469. That's the right one, right?
Yeah.
Draft 1 on first reading for the board for approval on second and final reading as amended.
Yeah. Striking. I don't know.
Striking lines
193.
193 and 194
With any technical changes as
and any technical changes. Thank you.
No, you're good.
Boy, I'm
That was a
grateful that somebody's
Is it-
keeping track of each of these sentence fragments.
We're a team.
That together, we've got a complete sentence here that hopefully will make sense in the minutes and for those that have to follow through with the recommendations that we are making. So with that motion on the floor, any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor, please raise your hand.
Yes.
And those opposed, raise your hand.
I'm voting no just right now because I want to make sure that I have my head in the right space about what is important for making sure teachers are covered, you know, in this material battle that we're going to be doing. So thinking about it before the full board.
Terrific, thank you. So that was for the amended motion, and one opposed, board member Reel, for those who are listening in. All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to 2.6, action item, course standards revision process revised.
Too soon.
Too soon. I'm sorry.
You go to lunch.
Listen, you heard me. I want to fix this, so.
All right, let's turn to Dr. Bronson for a brief overview.
Thank you for hearing this item so close after maybe there's still some detail. But I think it's always beneficial to come off of reflecting upon what we've most recently done and see how we can continue to improve the process. Both for the public, obviously their engagement, as well as board members and ultimately the kids that we serve. This is core standards. So what you did last time was supplemental. So I just want to clarify the difference. Core standards are things that are going to be like the K-12 ELA that you just finished. Up next in the fall, that is being most likely will be Cube, if the board approves, will be mathematics through 12. So these are the standards that hit like 650,000 children versus like the standards last night are under 1,000. So this is a really important process that we want to make sure we get right, but also create some flexibility of we're not perfect, and maybe the process that we have now isn't going to be perfect, and the opportunity for the board to have a way to say, we love sticking to our process, but we need a way out of sticking to our process that leaves an integrity with the board, that it's not just we're doing whatever we want, but we're following our process and have some flexibility to say when we need to break from that process. That has been added in here. So I'm sure you all have taken so much time reviewing this document. If you don't mind, I would love to share my screen so I can make edits as we go, as I'm sure there is feedback. And I know board member Real has sent some out in advance, so as we kind of go through today, I'll make those edits as you all determine what the group to make, and then we can forward that version if it's ready.
And Chair, if I may.
Dr. Norman.
One of the things to note is November is going to be a big month because that's when some standards are going to be coming to all of you, and it's going to be the mathematics standards. So if we look at time of looking at this is a nice way to get into it to begin with. We have a board meeting again in August, and then once something starts in a process, then that is a process that uses till the end. So if it goes through and the board hasn't decided on a new process before November and the process kicks off in mathematics, then if something's changed afterwards, it wouldn't change that process. Does that make sense? And so that's one of the things to keep in mind, timing.
If we want to change, we should change now.
Change it,
Yeah.
yes.
Jump into that in November.
How long does it take to put a writing committee or review committee together?
Which
Like
one?
to get,
So there's two different committees.
I know, well,
Yes.
I mean, like, so for this math, so there's gonna be a writing committee, right? And so, as I know, it's triggered math, then we go through the steps, but I'm just trying to go backwards if we do 90-day public comment.
Yeah, so generally the process takes 24 months if we go at a 6-month writing time. Math might take 6 to 9 months. So you're looking at 2.5 years, I'd imagine, with this revised process currently as it stands. So if you choose to add more, board member Earl and I talked, if you choose to add more standards and assessment, you're adding an extra month every time because it has to go in between the committee to put through.
I guess I'm wondering, what do you think, when do you think we need to have this finalized for, to make sure everything stays?
Yeah, we typically come in September to the board. So if like we need 2 months in this committee, we could certainly do that and have full board in September. And we could then come to committee, well, whatever the process is. So if we don't come till October, we don't come till October.
I just want to make sure that we're good on that part.
Yeah, we're flexible, that part. The trick is if you get too off of timing, it's the assessment. So you'll be 2 years before we can create an assessment if we pass this. If you start the standards too late, you're now delaying the implementation by a year because we can't change the, we have to give enough time for people to change before we change the assessment. We need time to change the assessment. So it cues ultimately when kids are actually assessed on the new standards. So the later we start, the later that potential is that we'll have to delay implementation.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure.
Great. You able to share?
There we go. It's gonna be really small.
It's also be on the back of
Maybe we start with whatever initial feedback is. We can go by step just to make it sequential, if that works.
I think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of thoughts until basically we get to the point where I started,
Like where we made it after public comment.
Well, no, even just the step right before that. I don't have any comments on those pieces, but maybe you guys all do.
Other board members have anything on 1 through probably 7.
Yeah, I do on 4.
Right in.
Yeah, so I would actually recommend we strike alignment to the portrait of a graduate. These documents are documents that come and go, meaning that we may have something right now that's an initiative by the board. In a couple of years, we may not. So but that doesn't mean that you can't use that as a recommendation, right? As a piece or as a resource tool. And then I would also strike connection to other areas, civics, character, education, financial literacy. I would just put something about law or rule or something like that, because those are elements of the law, right? And then as laws change, we're not, I know these are examples, but we're just saying curriculum related laws or something like that. Does that make sense?
So important.
I'm on 4.
Okay, so I didn't catch the last part you said.
Well, it says connection to the other areas, civic character education, financial literacy. I guess I would just recommend curriculum law, right? Because that's where that comes from. Is that accurate? Or do you want that? Does that need to be more spelled out there?
I mean, that's what it's trying to say, connecting that to the REG, but I suppose it's one every time. So
Yeah.
that one. So we can definitely just reframe it to be connected to laws related to curriculum and then leave it there for as new laws come, we can connect with those without being restricted.
Right, that's, And once again, when we do examples, we tend to leave out, right?
Well, if somebody gets about that.
It might need to be a stronger word than connections to laws.
Right.
Following, like, just maybe it's like,
Yeah.
Direct
in accordance with, yeah.
Okay.
Great. So that was number 4.
Yeah.
Anything else in the,
Or do you guys want to vote on the whole document? Do you want to vote as we go?
Well, we could vote on 4, right? And then we could go to, well, let's vote from the top down to 4. Does that make sense? From 1 through 4.
any other questions or comments from any board members
On 1 through 4.
on 1 through 4? No? All right, then let's vote. I guess we need a,
I make a motion that we accept 1 through 4 as recommended.
right,
That's 1 through
we
4.
have a motion to accept 1 or to recommend 1 through 4 to the full board for their as amended. All those in favor, please raise your hands.
Natalie, is that a yes or a no?
I think it's a yes.
Great, so that's unanimous. We're now 5 on.
Okay, so let's just read through 5 on, because that's where I want to make sure I understand where we're at.
Yeah.
So we've just come out of we've recommended, right? There's recommendations that came. And that's the parent review or, right? Those are reviewing, right? This isn't the writing committee. They're coming before us and providing that information, okay?
The staff will usually represent the review committee to the board and say, here's their recommendations. In the past, what that's looked like is the board was like, thank you, but we didn't have like an official, like how we accept those or not, and it became kind of not. So in this case, you would vote to accept or reject each of their recommendations. And then board members would also be able to bring their own recommendations for voting. So that if some of the recommendations from the review committee weren't what you would also like to see, this would be the board members' upfront opportunity to say, we also want you to consider this, vote as a board. Yep, that's a recommendation that then goes to the writing. That's what this document is.
Right. So this is pre-public comment, but still being able to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this is,
that was what I added.
this is work that's come out of
How
the,
you drive
Yeah.
staff at the beginning, which hasn't been the past. The past has really been the review committee was the only thing writing the writing committee. This is the board's opportunity to help to also drive the writing.
and that could just be accepting the,
Definitely.
right,
could.
the recommendations and,
You might be like, they missed this thing, let's also bring that up.
okay.
All right, so
Any-
how would we need to rewrite?
I think it's there already,
Yeah,
right?
that's what that is. So if there's any changes, but basically you're gonna vote, which wasn't before we had but like I said, what are we supposed to do? That's what happened in board last time. So it's like, let's vote to accept or reject theirs. And you could say, we're gonna accept all, or you could divide and say, we're gonna accept these ones and so on. And then also board members could bring their recommendations for that. And at that point, we would vote on those. And that ultimately would be given to staff to then lead with the writing. And then the second part was just around us giving you the information you would want on who the writing committee member makeup we would recommend of staff. So that would include their names, their positions, and their organizations. So that might be an LEA, it might be a higher education institution, it might be an educational partner. So you know who might be on the committee and can approve that list. We did think that that would be best to be either done in executive or by board leadership so we don't like have any moments of potential disparage or like anything that could be perceived as disparaging. Like you have too many teachers on this committee. We can do that behind closed doors or in public. So the way it's verbalized right now would be board leadership instead of board. Previously it was board. So I want to call that out and be explicit about that change. It would be up to board leadership in this case, or you could choose to say, let's do an executive session and we can make that change. But right now it would be leadership making the decision if they approve of the names that we vote.
It's good. Make sure I'm understanding you correct. So you're saying on the second part, staff presents the draft list to the board. So
In this case, it would be to board leadership, the way it's written right now. So if you want it to the full board, you all want to weigh in, I would love if you would lean towards executive session, just so that, because it's talking about people, that it remains private and not. The list can come out as.
I don't know, but I prefer full board. I just think that the strength of a 15-member board is the representation and the diversity of background and thought. We might miss something if it's just board leadership. Not that they're not almost perfect, but you got a lot on your plate. So if this is one more thing.
The only
where you
thing
have
is
to-
I can tell you, this will be a 2-hour debate and we're having, you guys, I mean, we can decide what we want. I think this is better in leadership than it is in
Do you?
15 members, but, let me ask this, is there a point where board members can put in recommendations on who to consider for that? Does that make sense?
It doesn't say you can't, but it doesn't have an explicit process to do so. So we might want to add that so that it is, again, what I
I'm
want
just wondering if there's a way to do a recommendation
So
and
we
then
could
that's
have
based on.
staff present a draft list, including requests from board members, and then we would send out an email to board members saying, if you have any people you'd recommend. For example, board member group in the arts, you might have some folks say like, these people are being that our staff isn't aware of or haven't considered. So that in math, one girls, math connections.
So now we've already passed the first part. I'm just wondering if we go down path A, one of the pieces here, we can always go back, right? We could reconsider that we just add something there about notifying board members if they have something about they could submit a recommendation, right?
Which part are you on?
I just went back up to the first, when you were first notified, when we vote to move it.
Oh.
Do you know what I
okay.
mean?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
they, just an indication or something that they could
And
work
staff
with staff or whatever.
recommendation.
And then that's I think where we're gonna get the 15 feedback. I think to debate those names at the end, it's gonna get ugly.
Okay.
Versus allowing people to put names in, right? And then narrowing those down, letting leadership work with staff on that. That's my recommendation, but
Putting it in number 2.
I would put right at the first, when we decide to go down this route, that's when we say,
In path A.
I would think if we went down the road, it's a notification or letting board members know that if they have recommended teachers or experts in the field to submit those to who?
To the, maybe we could say to staff in the role, in each one, because it'll be different for each. Board members.
So can we make, rather than going back and re-voting, just make that a friendly amendment, just part of the amendment that we have already referred to around it?
I think I can I'm happy to make that up, like, something that we don't have to reassess and then
Could we make an amendment?
I think that what you can just do, and Brian's on here as well, is in your second motion, whatever this one's going to be, it was going to be 1 through 4.
That we
and
could
then
add
5.
that
You
amendment.
could just
back
say 1 through 6, and then go back and say 1 through 8, and 1 through 10. So by the time you're done, you've done the entire document.
That's a good way to do it.
Let's make sure, Brian, is that appropriate?
Yes, yeah. Hello, everyone. Just got over from Long Licensing. Yes, Patty, to answer your question. That works.
Okay, yeah.
Does that feel like a good place to put that in? And then people are proactively not.
Well, it allows us, because at that point, we want those names in advance. This is great for timing wise, because then we can like, we're gonna have different committees, we need enough K2 teachers and pre-5 and all of that, diversity as well, so that.
How hard is it to recruit and convince
It's getting
folks to
harder
be
just
on
with
this?
how long it's taking lately. People are like, I didn't want to dedicate my life to this. for
Yeah.
years. So we just have to be very transparent upfront, like this is a pretty long obligation.
Right.
And most of the time it's done during the day, and so there's not a payment because they're being paid by their LEA. So there's not a big financial incentive.
That makes me not want to go to the
So is
full
there
board for
Yeah,
discussion, because if it's already fun, we get a list and they're committed and they're willing. They know that they're doing this work for nothing, basically, for a very small amount, which is their career probably too. That they aren't getting.
It's a very invested.
Exactly.
Like that want
Yeah.
to be involved for sure.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm wondering what that looks like right now where, like the Speaker of the House of Representatives, right? How often do they deliver on the 5 days?
They've always delivered, so we have not had them fail, they just used to take a really long time, so we amended the code 2 years ago to be like, you give them a time.
so you only have,
Yeah, so they're much better about it.
So how does that work with the list that we would present to you?
So this is, so the review committee comes from the legislature, and then you've got the board part that comes from board leadership. It's actually just the chair, so that's required in code, so the board chair appoints the members for the review committee, and then you all would have recommendations as a full board for this amendment to say who you want on the writing committee, and then leadership would make the final determination with the way it's written. Yeah.
I think that's good. So we get our 15 board member input in that.
Except two.
Except two.
If you want to, it'll be an optional.
this
Sounds
one is
good.
in code, you can't, right?
Yeah, right, that's.
That one's actually, yeah, that one's all in code. So we're actually, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So that, yeah, I'm just in
You're doing
there. So you got 5 periods for the house, we 5 periods. So that we have the state board chair. 1, 2, 7 minutes.
They could pick
Not
that
a period. She's doing the students review. Oh, I see. They don't do that. Okay.
Can you show me on what step where we do the 7? So that's that.
So go back up to 3A, 7 individuals with expertise in the subject being reviewed, including teachers, business representatives, faculty of higher education institutions in Utah and others, as determined by the state board chair. So that would be the 7 for the initial review.
3A, 5 to step.
Where we have the opportunity to submit.
No,
No.
that,
Wow. So this is-
yeah,
Oh,
that's
this is
good.
good. This is
This
good, yeah.
recommendation here is for individuals to be on the writing committee.
Oh, this is, which is step.
And if we give them pre-information early enough, then people will,
Yeah.
does that make sense? People will review here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But it's giving the heads up if people choose to. If they choose not to, that's fine, but this way they've been given the opportunity.
So the people that the board members want on the writing committee are the names that we should submit
On A.
on step 8, 1A, that will affect when we get to step 6. And then those will be approved by board leadership. Is that right?
And are you wanting just a name or if there's something to name on this slide? You just like, is there anything? with-
Oh, I would
Yeah,
think we would want, I don't know that an
Yeah.
application, but maybe a,
Right now, step 5 is names, position, and organization.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the 3.
yeah, I would think that would be it. Because you want more than that. We want to, yeah.
Know why, yeah.
I don't want a resume, but.
Yeah, I want to know, like, what's their position? They're a higher education operation, whatever they might be. Like, it's helpful to know, because we want diversity of expertise as well. So this is a kindergarten teacher, this is a math specialist, this is a math coach, like, trying to get that diversity of roles and responsibilities. It's something we look for as staff, and then you all would put that final list.
The resumes are never bad, but, you know.
I
also-
suppose someone could submit that, but I
Bare
would want
minimum.
yeah, you would want certain things for sure.
It's kind of like when we get recommendations. They say, do you have any recommendations for this committee or this board or whatever? You know, you can send over your rationale.
So I'm gonna ask another question here. So let's say 15 board members, we each submit one name. Is there an interview process or is there just an initial review? Are you allowed them to contact them? Do board members need to ask that person for their name? I'm just thinking silly little logistics right now, but for the sake of discovery.
I don't know. I don't know, I haven't done it before.
Yeah, I know.
Staff just tries to get enough people to be in the different like stands. So like, do we have enough representation from like K2?
So normally, how many would you have in each of those grades?
Anywhere from like 5 to 8 people per grade, to allow us to have enough diversity of thought and experience and opportunity.
So looking at 80. Not
No,
80.
no, no, no,
Like,
like
times
per
it by
stand.
10.
So like, there's about 30 people. Is what we're gonna.
Make phone calls as it stands right now or send email.
Like what generally like for standards, we work with so many people across the state on various projects and things like we have our typical people we rely on. That's where it'll be nice for having board members give us an additional piece. Because we're out there, we meet with the math majors committee. We have the instructional coaches for mathematics every year institute. So we have a lot of connections with folks that we rely on. We have people that teach our endorsement courses. And so that's the typical pool. We don't put out like a general who wants to be this. Typically, it's a little more intentional. But as board members, you're going to be able to help kind of diversify that pool to maybe people we are not as well known to.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Natalie, have any there?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so are we ready to approve 1 through, where are we now, 6?
5.
5.
We confirm what to.
Yes,
This is where not.
So
The
the only amendment we made was actually step 1 or step 2A. And so I added request board members submit writing committee recommendations to staff within 30 days, including the individual's name, position, organization, and email address. And I will add the contact. So that's what we would want from you is the name, their position, their organization, and email address. So we have a way to contact them.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so
On 6,
we have a motion on the floor. Those who are in favor, please raise your hands.
Yes.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Let's move on.
So on 6, I would recommend, it says, so this is just reports, bi-monthly progress submissions, that those come to the Standards and Assessment Committee instead of us taking up time in our full board meeting. So it would just say staff provides bi-monthly progress submissions to the Standards and Assessment Committee, including progress being made in timely updates. That sounds to me like committee work, not.
Sounds good.
Bi-
Anything else on 6?
Yeah, you'd need to strike that.
So twice a month
No,
when I'm submitting something?
Bi-monthly, every other month. I can
Okay.
change that language. Bi-monthly has 2 meetings, but we do attend every other month.
Okay. Anything else on number 6?
I have so staff organizes a writing committee according to the process approved by the superintendent. Where do we find that process?
We don't have like a defined one yet, superintendent. We generally have facilitated the group and determined it. I think what we'd like to do as staff is come up with a more consistent practice of what that goes about, just for we have new staff that most of our staff have never done standards because they're not usually here for a decade, somewhat. But because we go that long in between cycles, this is a new process for each time staff does it. We don't have a standard operating procedure, so that's what we mean by that. We would create a standard and operating practice of how we go about this, which would include like recruiting from the board members, their recommendations, filing that list, sending it to board leadership, and the whole process that would look like. So that's what we intended by that.
Can I ask me if that's superintendent?
Give me a softball, man, it's Friday.
I know. Frequently not reading. I'm just wondering what you found to be the most successful in interviewing people and
recruiting people and finding quality people ready?
That's a great question. You know, we've statutorily, this goes back to Becky Lockhart. So when statute was put in place for parents to be involved in the initial committee to say, do we need to launch standards? We really tried gathering from all sources. You know, we would put it out through like traditional channels of organized parent groups. We would put it out through social media. We asked legislators to some of their constituents, and it was so difficult to get parents involved. Much easier, as Dr. Bronson mentioned, who have teachers willing to come to the table because they see it's sort of a, you know, teachers want to do things outside of the classroom and they really want to have that leadership experience. It's much easier to put it out on your listserv and say, you know, I mean, it's, how do I want to say this? Teachers don't know the opportunities that are out there for them. And I think we have over time done a much better job. We used to have like, oh, I know her, she was on this committee where she leads this group. So you get the same people at the table all the time. So now we have these opt-in listservs, we have teacher leadership roles, we have ways to reach out and say, there's really civic engagement for you to go beyond your classroom and help write standards. So I think we're getting more interest that way. I do want to address the standard operating procedure. We've done that for everything in our office. Dr. Norman gets a lot of credit for that. And in our special ed section, they have been working on standard operating procedures. So those are very precise and they're written up. So it's no longer left to interpretation of what might be the best process. I really appreciate Dr. Brunson thinking through that. Like we really do need something written that they then can actually bring back to you to say, this is our standard operating procedure for gathering people to do this work. And I think that will broaden us.
Yeah, and I know that teachers has my elementary and she's a part of the science process or standard writing something. This was like 8 years ago. And she's very proud of it. And it was a wonderful opportunity for her. And I was happy to hear, you know, that I was just happy to see her happy. And so I do think that is, if there's something that we're missing that we could develop here as well as part of, I don't know, say process or the official process, but for you, what is it that you might need that could help streamline getting quality people on the right committee that maybe doesn't exist yet, just because this is how we've done things for so long. But if we're seeing things, if you're seeing things that is proving fruitful in a positive way, I'm just nosy that way. And I'd like to know what it is. And because it would help us on our end, bring other people to this as well.
As recently, the Hope Street Fellows, they're a great opportunity to really out to educators, taking that teacher leader group and say, we can help recruit for this. And then we get names and vet those names with folks to say, what do you think about that? Because again, we don't know, there's 36,000 educators in the state boards level at each and every one of them. And so in those opportunities, like people do love being on it because they really get to see the process is intense to write standards. It's a lot of mental energy, but to see it come together and see the end product and then know you're impacting hundreds of thousands of children, honestly millions. By the time you get through the K-12 career, the standards have been in place for a lot of kids. It has a big influence. So we definitely get very motivated folks coming to the table, but I think having a process that's more defined. Right now, it's like whenever in the past, it's just been whatever each specialist wants to do. And that is different. That's why I made that a change is like, I don't think we should just leave it up to the specialist decision. Like, let's have a practice that we follow.
So what you're saying, are we developing that process approved by the superintendent? And does that process come to us?
It would be a superintendent thing. We can't bring it to you all, but it's not currently would not be.
Yeah, in fact, we have an entire area where we have standard operating procedures. And it really is coming from an audit in the very beginning that, you know, is this process documented, written down, is it transparent, is it clear? And so we have processes that we have quite a collection in every area across from finance to everything. So if someone at any point were to say, is this process documented, is it transparent, whatever, we have it.
We just haven't had enough of this. So I can go back. May I? Can I have a privilege? That's true.
So we just have a participant who was on the red.
Yeah, so, a board, I was, UTA mom, school community council mom, and one of our board members, Kristen Betts, reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to be a parent member of this review committee for secondary social studies curriculum? And I
I was there with you at that one.
it was an incredible experience. We met twice, I think. And honestly, the parents that were there were committed, and we wanted, and really they had only slotted for parents to be there for 2 meetings. But a lot of us were like, I would come back for more meetings. Like, this is such a neat process. And then after, then after, even when I was running for my local school board and during other times, I was able to say to other parents, I was on this committee and I have confidence in the process. So anyway, it's a testament to that.
Yeah, no, but, and I guess what I'm coming down to is if we say in our step that we have a process that's improved, I just want to quality check that, like moving forward, that that's actually something that we can, put our hands on if there's conflict of any kind. And right now, I kind of feel like that line is a bit vulnerable, and I don't want you to be, in harm's way, or us to be in harm's way, or that problem to surface, because
There isn't a clear process right now.
There's
right?
not.
Correct.
So-
SOP will make. Thanks for reference.
Well, I guess that's on your guys' list, right? Okay. So when we vote for this, we say, oh, they have a process,
Like,
right?
this is a red thing, so I haven't done anything towards it. The intent
Okay.
is, I saw the need for a more defined process, as you all are agreeing. And so if this does get approved, we will have a standard operating procedure for how we vote.
Can I ask a question? I'm just looking at numbers 7 and 8, and they use the term feedback. And then down on path B, novel revisions. Do we have, is that defined? Are we talking, feedback as in, did you think about this, or did you think about that? Or are we talking specific amendments? There's been confusion in the past with what certain language meant or means, or, when they ask board to give their input for 30 days or recommendations, I mean, some people saw that as strictly meaning amendments, whereas others did not. So there was a lot of confusion in the terminology being used, and I think it would help to clarify exactly what we mean by those terms.
The intent was in the EG, so novel would be significant meaning or intent change in the standard. So let's say it's math, it was an addition standard, and now it's a multiplication standard. Like, that would be a significant, math is not, so I'm trying to put my math brain on.
So revisions, by revisions, every time you use feedback or revisions or recommendations, do you mean amendments?
Yeah.
Because amendments is different.
No, so are we looking, which one are you looking at? Because it depends on the
So it's on, well, you've got, I'm thinking from our past experience in the last few months, some of the other terminology that we've used, but in 7 and 8, it looks like the word is now that's being used as feedback, or in path B, it says revisions.
Yes, so for 7, it would be like you saying, here's how I would like to see it, but ultimately it goes to the writing committee to make those adjustments based on your feedback. So if we can make an amendment, but it's not amendments, that's not from the board. It is truly like you saying, I would like the standard be written this way. We take that to the writing committee. They consider it, they give their rationale as to why or why not that they change that and what they would propose be the new one. Then in the next one, the better language in 8 might be amendments, but for 7, feedback.
So later when you bring back, so we go through this process and then somebody brings forward an amendment and they say, well, was that given as part of the feedback during the feedback period? Well, no, or then you can't make that amendment. Well, we didn't make amendments during the feedback period. We gave our recommendations, our suggestions, our feedback. And now, you know, it's, do you see what I'm saying?
So I think what you're getting at, I'll let the committee, they probably understand better, but the amendment part would still be allowed or would be first allowed in PAP B. If you've got something that's new that was never considered, or now based on the changes the writing committee made, you've got additional recommendations, then that might go with PAP B. That there was
So it would
those-
say novel revisions or amendments.
Probably change it, I mean, we could just change it to amendments to make it simpler, there. That's what I'm thinking.
That would be fine.
Yeah, I just think if we use simple terms that consistently throughout, that it's clear, everybody knows what it means.
Absolutely.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, the way I see it is that step 7 is, here's our opportunity to give feedback about what we'd like it to include. Goes out to public comment. Then in step 8, we can come with amendments after we've seen that draft that's after public comment, right? And that's where we can get amendments. And then those amendments are reviewed by the writing committee before we vote on it, right?
So feedback is fundamentally different than amendments. And I think that there should be informal and formal. So formal amendments, and then there's informal feedback or suggestions for possible revisions.
I'll call this board amendments on step 8 with some revisions to for consistency.
We just, just clearly delineate between the informal and the formal.
You're putting both, I can't see if you're what you're doing, but you're putting both feedback and.
No, so we left feedback in 7, and then 8 is called board amendments and public review, and then amendments instead of revisions in PAP B.
I think there's like, I think you could put both, only because like, you know, when we were going through some of them and we were talking about it, it was like, why is this, you know, it was more of a feedback thing. It wasn't like, you should change this. It was like, can we add clarification here? Like, you're not saying here are the words that need to say.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could say both,
Yeah,
feedback or amendments.
Now, does this happen full board or is this in our committee?
Step
I
7.
think that one is full board. You're just noticing the board, right?
Yes.
Am I right? The staff submits a draft of standards to the board for review and feedback. In other words, they're saying here, all board members, here's the rough draft. If I'm understanding this right, and then you can make revisions. It doesn't literally come before the board in a meeting.
Yeah. It's just
Oh,
saying,
right?
you
Am I
can
right in
go
saying
through
that?
the feedback.
Yeah, it was like
The
noticed.
reality is probably most of the standards are there, like people that are paying attention to it, you know, it's like, that are gonna do it, but you'll
you
give an
got-
opportunity for anyone on the.
Yeah, and as leadership in here, you will know and be able to follow through too, right? Right?
I don't know.
That's what my
Also,
assumption is.
Also just have it, it's hard, so we could have it as an information item that just
On the
says, here, yeah,
consent calendar.
that says this is coming to you and, you know, tomorrow. Except for then it has to be the formal board meeting, so you have to wait for a date, so that sometimes could be 30 days added here or there. Does that make sense if they're ready? So
The idea to go to the full board is like, let's say member Lear is obsessed with math and she has a lot of ideas, which
I
she's
know
not on
she's not.
standards. That's why I used her as an example. So, but then she knows that this step is happening and she has the opportunity before it even comes to standards, before we, you know, to go and put all of her feedback or amendments out there.
I don't think we have to wait. I don't think we have to wait for a board meeting. I think when they have it compiled, it's a notice to us.
Yeah. I don't want to delay with the dates.
Because otherwise we're pushing those months and months and months for things. Does that make sense? But it has to be a clear email. That's the only thing on the email, and a clear notice. And it really, we need to probably make sure you two are aware. So
you
you can,
want that as part of one of the steps, provides notice to the board. So it's like
Which step?
in
are we
an
taking?
email.
well, it wouldn't be a new step. It would just be staff submits a draft of the standards. However you're going to
Yeah.
submit it, we just articulate it there to the board, right?
And like for this step 7, where we're gonna submit the draft to the board for no feedback. So this, in the past, we would be submitting it straight for public review. This is actually a precursor step that the board gets to play in first. Then we take that feedback to the committee. Then we say, okay, is it good enough to go to the public now? If not, path B, it goes back with those additional amendments or feedback to the committee. Otherwise, it goes to public review. So what we probably want in drafts in step 7 is to put in a piece that says staff will email following the meeting,
notice.
just to kind of
Draft.
notify, like, or another reminder.
Yeah. And the idea is here is that the public will be able to see some of our feedback as well, and maybe they'll agree with our feedback. And
Later.
right, but also there too, incentive. When we're providing feedback, and then it goes out to the public view, right? We get the opportunity to put in feedback with the public, right?
Let's be clear on this. I'm still,
Yeah.
so that if I'm understanding, we would provide feedback, they would make modifications to the standards if they chose to, right? This is, and just help me with this if I'm right. If the writing committee chose to, they would update and make those recommendations. Those recommendations go out, not everything that was provided to the board. Are we saying the same thing?
Yes, we're saying the
Okay,
same thing,
okay,
saying the same thing, yeah.
okay. Maybe.
Are you clear, Jennifer?
So far. I think so. I swapped it to, I put in the line, staff will email the board members to submit their feedback and have provided a template to the writing committee for consideration within 30 days of email notice. So basically say, you'll get an email from us, but that's the day of board meeting after you say yes, or maybe 2 days later, you'll have 30 days from that one. The trick with 30 days is we miss the next board meeting. So you're really, we're 2 months out for this particular step because 30 days is not, doesn't allow us to come back to you the next board meeting. That makes sense. But we also, 30 days is probably reasonable to give you the time to read K-12 statements. So
This doesn't have to be at a board meeting. 7 is correct. Okay, so that could go mid-month.
yeah, potentially.
So we
Well,
may not be.
the way it's
2
written
months.
right now is it's an action item control board. So do you want to take that out? I thought it was just going to be a notification. It's not, currently not written that way. So
To
that would be a
notify
perfect
is what needs to be there,
action item.
because otherwise we will be adding probably an extra 30 days.
They said add an extra month, so.
Yeah. So
Okay,
just
so
a
if we can just
notification,
think about it when we're done and
Yeah.
say you've got 30 days and that will allow us to potentially come to that, like, board meeting. Okay, I love that.
That's good.
Thank you for trimming. It really, it's a long process.
So let me ask a question number 7. If a board member were in another committee, they were busy, or they missed the feedback period in the 30 days and stuff, 7, are they allowed to come forward with amendments and step dates? If they,
Well,
7.
the way that it says right now, the board can accept requests for additional novel amendments. It would be up to the board to determine whether they're going to accept those at step 8. So there is an opportunity, if you miss the 30 days, you're like, I have more, but it's going to be based on the new draft. So it's not actually on the old draft anymore. So it would be based on the new.
but it's still, there are opportunities,
The second part.
yeah, there
At
are
this point,
opportunities for them to still provide feedback or amendments.
I guess I don't see this piece in 8 as a narrow down the wording, right? I see this as an overall feedback, right? Like this, although they are the standards, it would be the direction.
It'd be big, well, how I see it being, maybe it needs some better verbalization, or these are big, like, yeah. Like big changes.
Take fractions out.
Yeah, we don't want numbers and operations
Nobody
strength at
wants to
all,
do-
like
yeah.
that's substantial is probably the better word. Not, I want this to say, I want to rephrase like this, I want to change these 3 words, those 2 are not substantial, this is, you want to delete whole strands, whole standards. What is my other thing? You would want to change the meaning or the intent, so of a standard or a strand, that it would be more significant. But if you've got wordsmithing pieces, or you want a particular term here or there, that can come later and doesn't need to be brought in Calc B. Calc B would be get rid of geometry. We don't want to ever have kids learn geometry. Take it out. That's a huge shift. And we would want to go back to the writing committee for those kinds of things. No.
Let me freeze myself here. That's, I've been trying to figure.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I understand well, let's go ahead and do your code, your law thing here first. And then
I'm such a visual learner. All I can think about is putting this into chart graph.
I might do it just for fun.
I would.
Yeah, that's just how my brain works.
Everybody will know
I know.
that's exactly what I do. I may or may not get some support.
Really, this is like why I did it. This was like a very
Yes.
simplified, like, these are the nuts and bolts, but like, here are the big visuals.
This is really meant to be, and it says substantial in nature, so you shouldn't be, it's happy bringing wording of it, unless you're saying, I'm changing the intent of this standard, or we want to delete entire standards or strands. That's what the is.
Maybe I can use the example, because when I did the social studies, I brought a list of 9 recommendations. They were broad recommendations, you know, to say
That would go back.
X, Y, Z, right? And then those were recommendations. At that point, it wasn't word saying these words need to better align. It was more, and then examples of what that would look like.
Yeah, it's the broad strokes, right? But not the minutia. And that's the part that B is that would be broad strokes. And then that are substantial, because you're gonna have time to wordsmith. That doesn't preclude us from doing it, but it has to be done meant to be wordsmithing. It's meant to be big ideas that change.
So I'd like to discuss, for just a second, what I had mentioned last night, 53-4-2 11H, where it says nothing in this section prohibits the state board from amending or adding individual course standards for Utah Public Schools as the need arises in the state board's ongoing responsibilities. So, and I'm open for how people interpret this. The way I see it is worst case scenario, we see something in math that we decided, like we overlooked fractions and fractions didn't make it in curriculum. And we're like, oh, oops, we should have done that. We need to add that standard. How do we apply this?
So that's a really great question because it's on our,
We have a process
we have a
for that.
process for that. And it speaks to, and if you want to bring that up, that would be great. And it's on our board website as well. So there's things that can do the process and there are distinct steps. Like there's a major revision in, whatever, or new findings or whatnot, and then how that process is kicked off. One thing it doesn't do is, and this is the transparency piece where you need to really consider what do you want as board members. It doesn't mean that someone looks through, the social studies standards and finds something and says, wait, I don't like this one thing. So if you bring it to the board the next month and say, I'd like to have this changed. And the reason why, and this is the part, the reasoning behind it, is the fact that as an LEA, when I was curriculum director, we had to save money to purchase books. We had to save money and then we had to pay money for professional development, teachers were out of the classroom, and then we had, and we follow that all along the line. If there's these onesies and twosies that happen along the way, then our LEAs aren't going to be able to purchase a new textbook. They're not going to be able to find those things. They're not, and so it really is this important enough when you bring it back? Are you opening up the entire set of standards, or are you opening up a section, or are you just doing this one standard? And if so, what does that look like as it goes all the way down the line? So those are things for your consideration. Say, what does that look like? Are we really going to stick to a 7-year cycle unless there's great change in, theory, practice, events that are happening in the world, whatever that is, that we absolutely need to put it in there. And then second step, what does that really open? Does it open the whole thing, sections? And then what does that mean down the line? Because our schools don't have a lot of money. And even though we say, here's a textbook and this is something online, for some reason people think that that online is less money. It's the same amount of money. You still need the writers, you still need everything. And then you have to make sure that you have the cybersecurity, all those things are in there. So it's equally expensive. And so in changing it, although it may seem like a quick change because I can just edit it, you still need the person, the process, the parameters that go all around.
So I guess in some ways, I don't know where you're, tell me if you have additional things, but I guess I think why, if a board member was interested, why wouldn't they get their recommendations in 30 days? That's what right here. So I personally don't think you need any feedback received outside the 30 days will not be considered, because it seems like you would have that time window. When that window's done, that feedback goes to the writing committee. And then it comes to the board. At this point, I don't see there's no, it didn't make it through committee, so therefore I'm going to bring something that is important to me. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Like I
This
want
is
something
still at
like
the-
that included, but we don't need it right
Not
there, is
here.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because you're saying the 30 days, maybe,
So then I'll be transparent. My intent here is we want to be able to be the board to be really clear. This is your time because we have to go to writing committee now. It's not time 45 days in, it's not time 60 days later, because we're gonna queue on this email notification, all the subsequent steps from there. And to get us to step 8, which is like path A, path B, which then takes us to potentially different pathways. But it's ultimately like if it comes in 45 days later, we are not going to attend to it. I was just trying to be transparent. If you guys don't think it's needed, we can take it out.
Going to public comment, that it is true that they won't have that opportunity again. Right?
Well, they will have opportunity.
But
Is
not
that what you're
with
saying?
that, not with the public comments, right?
This will be the only time, step 8 is the only time we go out for public. After that, it's all.
Oh, right,
board
right.
work.
That is true. That is true. I see what you're saying. So that I mean, no one, you wouldn't have to engage here even if you were interested, right? You could engage after the public comment period, but it just, if you wanted to be proactive, you would
Right.
engage here.
Yeah, and I guess now that you say that, I do get a little, I understand why because there's been moments when we're like, well, why don't we wait? Or why don't we? And it's like, this is messing up the whole train that's going down the track when we try to say, well, let's go back to this step. We can't do that. So I understand why you have that in there. I think it's important to put in there in a couple places, but
Okay, so I think you could put, if it's received outside the 30 days, it could just be included as public comment.
Okay.
Instead of it won't be considered, it's just included as, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
included as public comment, then you would go,
yeah, that's a great way to say it.
would that be accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you've got to have it, you can't just say we'll keep collecting. There has to be a framework that says we're collecting in this framework so we can actually respond, right? So we can get prepared for public comment.
Yeah.
Would it just really clear, would it be any board feedback received outside of the 30 days will be considered as public?
Will be included.
Will be included. Okay.
Does that?
As
Bill?
public comment.
Yeah.
Okay. They can go on there, go through the whole thing.
And it can still be included, anything can be
Yeah.
included as public comment,
Yeah.
but this allows for that. Does that feel right?
But then it also keeps that in there just as it's in here, it's very clear, you know,
Or like that staff to be, like, we wanted to just be more transparent, like, we don't, when we say 30 days, we're gonna work with in the 30 days, and we don't wanna, and this board member say, well, I couldn't get it done in 30 days. That's the process. Again, you and I have had the process conversation. I need a process.
Trying to stick to processes.
right. It's nice to say, like, it helps with that conversation, like, it was, you know.
It will be
Public
considered,
comment.
it's gonna have to go here because we had to meet the time frame
Exactly.
in order to get
Because
the
we
feedback.
plan on when the right committee meets, so we have to go 30 days, and it'll be 31 day that they will meet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, okay, so we're changing that from action item just to a notice, right?
Yep, email notification.
Okay, and then we're adding on,
So the 30 days worth. Yeah.
included as, okay, and so then talk about date. So when. Okay. I think, once again, because this is broad, do you anticipate this being?
Yeah.
I'm good with this going before the full board. Emily? Randy? The rest of you? Yeah, that's okay. This isn't the final, this is that prepping for public comment.
Do they still have it on the screen? I'm just not even seeing, I just see the code on the screen.
Yeah.
We're switching it over. Hang on.
Natalie, what are your thoughts on that? I actually am good with it just going, because it is broad still.
Well, I just would like to be able to see it. I can't see it.
Yeah, that's fine.
I can't see any of this. I don't know why.
The unamended one is in backup.
Oh, there, we're gonna find a moment. I like this. Share my screen. All right, okay, so lots of things for a moment. Okay. I don't know why it shows two things.
Can you enlarge it?
Oh, the old version, I can't do anything. So,
Let's try and, we're just one second.
We're back to the code.
can't seem to get rid of the code. The code wants to stay. Can't even find the
MRSA on my computer. She's working on it
Okay,
now.
Okay, let's just talk this through. So path A, the board approves the request to release the draft food standards public review. On approval of the draft release, staff will publicize the release, blah, 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 right? Path B, the board accepts the request for additional revisions that are substantial in nature. Staff will work with the writing committee to attend for board revisions. Staff will return the board with a new draft and request to release for public view. So basically, path B includes.
If there were a significant issues.
Yeah, right.
Right.
The fact that it goes to the right.
If there's
Yeah,
nothing, then it
Yeah.
just goes to the public.
Yep, then we would
If it
release
what,
it.
then we go to the path, right, okay.
Not get into.
Thank you.
So when we say, the board accepts requests for additional items on the agenda, or the board approves of it, if that. Yeah, it's very much. So I'm gonna imply that, that's just how we function, but I don't think it's have that. The board, this is, it's disconnected. How do they have this first? And then how do they approve the request? And how like that is the votes. I know that's sometimes a reason. Like that's not helpful.
It'll be on the
Well,
memo.
right.
Yeah, it's on the memo.
Okay,
Yep.
just a second, Natalie, when it comes back up.
They just do entire screen. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna do. Then it'll stop doing it.
Okay.
Yay.
For your patience. Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at.
So
A.
did
And this
anything
is-
change on 7 or just on 8?
We added. Yes, we made changes here on 7. So you want to read those out, Jennifer?
So it says staff will email the board members to submit their feedback in a provided template to the writing committee for consideration within 30 days of email notification. If feedback is received outside of the 30 days, it will be included as public comment.
And then you also, on your action item, change that from full board to email.
Yes, and then they changed how it will be done, which is just an email and then it becomes an agenda item to the board.
Okay.
That is there. And then all we've changed so far in 8 was took out revisions and changed the language to amendments or feedback. To be more clear that you could bring amendments or feedback.
Does that mean what you wanted there?
Yeah, as long as, amendment, it doesn't limit amendments to that time frame, so that amendments could be brought later if needed. But yeah,
Anything with path A or B? Or did you want?
All right, do we want to approve 1 through 8?
Okay.
Looks like there's no objection to that, so let's vote. Those who are approve what we've discussed, 1 through 8, please raise your hand.
yes.
Natalie is a yes, it's a unanimous. Okay, let's move on to 9.
The public review, this did not change at all. So if you want changes.
Yeah, no, I don't have any change beyond that.
Was fine.
Okay.
I should have some significant.
Yes.
How do you guys determine what location you go to for those?
Generally, like, we try and get to north, south, and middle of the date, and then the virtual option allows us to get in. But virtual honestly is better, for guests, like we get kind of chastised in some of these meetings, when you drive all the way from Kanab to St. George, like, the virtual options are actually at this point in time better received. People think it's an equity issue, like, who can have access, so virtual is actually something we weren't doing in the past, that we have started to put into this process because we're actually leaving people out.
So are you doing, just clarify, you're doing a location, but you're doing it virtually at the location?
No, we'll do like just a virtual because of hybrid, oftentimes the people virtually are disadvantaged in some ways. You can't hear everyone.
So you're doing both?
Yeah, so we do in person separate and then we do a virtual.
So around
can come, and then if not, you can go into the virtual with everyone.
Virtual makes it.
I was just checking. I thought you were saying we're just doing them virtual for
No,
location.
we will still do on sites.
Okay. And this may be the battle here. I think this needs to come back to, it is standards and assessments responsibility to put out the best document we can. So, staff submits to the standard and assessment, committee an amended version of the publicly released draft standards that incorporates the feedback from the public. And I'm going to talk to two reasons why. We can talk to other things. One reason why, and we see this when we bring a draft of something before the board that has several drafts going on or revisions, we often make recommendations and move something and then have to go back and reconsider pieces of it because there's something about seeing it twice, right? That's why we have two readings and things, right? And a month in between so that we can, narrow it down. I can't remember the other reason. It's really good though.
So you're recommending that step 10, just the type of agenda item is action item, standards and assessment, basically.
Yep. Okay. And I think it's our responsibility to put something out. Once it gets out, then, I think we notify board members so they can provide, additional feedback if they have.
And then if that is the case, then this is where, if we do go to standards and assessment instead of to the full board, then this is where I want standards and assessment committee has to submit feedback and amendments by this date. Then it goes to the writing committee and then we meet. So we're not getting amendments the day before we meet in standards and assessment.
Oh, I think we have to have
I think we need to be
some
really
kind of a
clear about
timeline because otherwise I can't prepare as a board member
Right.
for that.
Yes, and I can't prepare when amendments are brought last minute. And I don't think it's efficient for us to talk about amendments without the writing committee first giving feedback, right? So a lot of those grammatical or just like rewording amendments that we've been going through could have been, the writing committee could have just changed them and added them in. And then when we met, they're already done, right? We're not talking about each one of these little changes, right? And when we come to an amendment in standards and assessment, we are sitting there with a document that says, here's what the writing committee said about that amendment, right? We already have that information. They have that. So if it goes to standards and assessment at this point,
So
I want to make sure it's really clear that if it's going to the standards and assessment committee, they have this much time to submit amendments and feedback. Then it goes to the writing committee and then we meet.
So we're
Standards
adding
and
a 30-day process here.
right? Or, I don't know.
Similar to what we used
You would have to change the bylaws to make that happen. Because the
Why?
bylaws protect us to be in being able to make amendments, not having that limited. Not saying that we shouldn't put forward as much as we can beforehand, but there's always going to be issues that come up during debate or things that are noticed that people didn't see before that we have to fix.
Right, but
So then I make just a clarification on step 10.
Please.
Step 10 was meant to be, and I know that this caused great confusion this last few iterations. Step 10 is meant to be a decision step. It's not a working step. It's not a step where new amendments are brought. It's not any of the, it says, here's the feedback from the public. What path do you want to take? So it was meant to be, comes to here and it says, here's all the feedback. There's this many changes, this many or this many. What would you like to do next? And the decision is path A, B, C. That's it. And then there's the next month where the staff has gone through and followed whichever step that you created. What's happened previously that was kind of where there was some confusion is this was seen as a step where those were brought and the standards and assessment committee started to make those revisions and then we're sending it to that. So if you want to change that, then that needs to be articulated there.
So maybe path C could be changed or B.
it's like I mean, that would be living in a reality that I don't know exists, where they go from public comment to the full board and they're like, woo, and then we move on, but I don't know. There we go. So, hey, it's perfect.
It's perfect.
But paths, so basically, I'm assuming we're gonna always end up on path
So
C.
why does it have,
And if so, then we could just change path C to
so
say.
why
that
does it
it's-
have to go to the full board for making that decision?
The reason why was to be able to say it's just a decision-making step, so does it need to take 2 months? Does it need to come to the standards and assessment committee for 1 month, we choose the path, and then to the full board to say, yes, that's the right path. And so it'd just be the full board going, yeah, there's this many standards, it's this much of a change, so we will decide instead altogether that it's just this path. It's not looking at any of the amendments and saying, because we want it to say this or that, or wording or anything, it's just a decision point of which path we want staff to then further develop. That's the intent of.
How are you going to make that decision though without additional feedback?
That, so,
You can't make any of these decisions on this because we don't have a feedback mechanism.
so if you go back to step 9, so the draft is gonna be posted, and then it's a staff will hold the, then what the staff will do is bring that feedback, and you can talk about the feedback, but you're not making the changes to the feedback at that point. You'd be discussing the feedback and say, with this much feedback in this area, we can see a need for this to go back. We can see a need for this, so we think it's gonna take a long time, so we're gonna go past. That was the intent. So if you don't want that to be the intent, that's what needs to be articulated.
How do we know that there are, I'm just using the example here, I'm not sure I agree with this, but how do we know that there's 10 or less amendments?
So there's a form that is brought back and you can see the public comments, if you remember, that comes through. And then you can see all of the changes. So it's not about the amendments, it's about the changes that are mentioned within.
Right.
Yes.
But, and I'm
It's a good
looking,
point, it's a good point.
but we don't
We don't
have,
have the wording right.
well, and I don't think we have, I mean, if there's additional amendments wanted from board members, we don't have, right? We don't have any of that. We're saying somewhere there that's there, but we don't have that anywhere.
So the path C is like a different bunch. So path A is like you guys look.
How do
at
you
it,
know there's a bunch?
You always determine in
Where?
that board meeting, in that meeting. If you want to bring, what.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Like from one of them that says.
We're missing that
feedback or
30,
something.
we're missing that 30 days for board members to.
Well, and I honestly, I don't remember ever receiving all of the public comment feedback, other than what little bit came back on the writing committee's spreadsheet with their recommendations. But I would like to be able to see all of the public comment feedback.
So ELA did submit the thousands of comments this back up in January or something. If you did.
Can you
actually-
turn around?
The mic is right above me. I don't think it matters, but correct.
Oh, I can hear you better when you turn a little bit.
Okay, so we did submit all the public feedback for ELA a few months ago. That's, we just sent it to you. It's not.
Yeah, because I did
tabulated or
go, I went
categorized, it's
through all of
just-
it.
Yeah.
We just sent it to you as it comes in Qualtrics, so it's not actually, we don't tabulate in any way for that. We like use categories and look through it for writing purposes, but for the board, we just give you the feedback as we receive it.
Well, we got it all for supplemental too.
Yeah, and we used to try and come back with themes, like here's what they said. But then some of our board members are like, well, that's biased, you know, because those themes that aren't the same things that I'm seeing. And so that's why it comes as just a raw document. This is what it, and you are all able to say, well, here's the things that I personally look at.
So what I'm saying is that there may be 10 amendments that the writing committee suggests. But they would make those revisions to come before us. Those aren't amendments.
The one you're receiving right now in step 10 is the amended version based on public comment.
Right,
That's
so
what you're receiving.
then my question is how do we know A, B, and C without some kind of a mechanism to?
We would be looking at that going, I see need for at least 5 on my end. I see 9 things here. And then you guys go, we've got more than 10. Send it back to wherever. Doesn't have to work this way, but that is what.
I don't think it will work
This is
that
like for
way.
you to decide.
I'm just not seeing that as I see that
Okay,
more as a fight in a board meeting.
Look at my steps 6 through 12. I think that's more what you're thinking.
Your step 6.
Yeah, 6 through 12. So it goes to public comment, they have a new draft,
Yep,
We give the full board
so many days.
so
that
many
they-
days.
If they,
Yep.
then we would know, we're not just
Yep.
speculating, yeah.
And then it goes to a writing committee, they create a new draft, and that draft is the one we're working on in standards and assessment. So
Yeah.
all of our amendments, after public comment on their new draft, we can then review in standard and assessment.
All our amendments.
Yeah, so it will go to public comment, they'll say, here's what we got feedback from public comment, here's a new draft of the standards. Then we open it up to say, the board can submit any new amendments or feedback. Then it goes to the writing committee, and we work off of that. Instead of, it's basically the same thing, except for it's those timelines I was
Yeah, we
saying.
don't need the A, B, and C, because it's just simply, we'll just put forward the document when it's complete.
Right. So it would go, but the key there for me is that before we meet a standards and assessment, the writing committee has reviewed our amendments.
The only problem I see with that is, it's just in our bylaws. It says there's no limit to the number of times the member receives for questions, motions, or okay.
But if there's still, so this comes to standards and assessment, if you open it up for a time frame, that there has to be a time when that is closed. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
that people can't.
In the moment, I'm sure that there will be changes to even the amendments we submitted based on the feedback and the new draft we'll have from the writing committee. But I just don't want to get a document that's, here's 50 amendments for tomorrow's meeting, and the writing committee hasn't looked at it and staff hasn't looked at it, and we're all like, what does this even mean? And, so that's what I'm trying to avoid, because that was what really made that process not great.
Here's my biggest fear with this, is that depending on if there's triggers there with certain people or certain subjects, that if there's not something in place like a bylaw or a law, then the powers that be, whether you're on top of that power structure or below it, can silence somebody from being engaged. So that's my worst case scenario. That's what I don't want to see happen. And
I knew that.
So
I
someone
know
could-
there's so many steps here to submit, including again, before it goes to the full board members can submit feedback. I think it's really inefficient for us to, as non-experts, tackle complex changes to the standards without having that opportunity for the writing committee to provide.
But Emily, I think someone could submit and say they don't want the writing committee's feedback. I mean, I think technically they could do that. Like you could submit amendment and say, I'm good with this, don't touch it, technically. But I still think the 30 days, there has to be a time frame for us to be able to,
Review and
you know what I mean?
understand.
And if
yeah.
someone wanted to not have that, like you're saying, maybe they're like, I'm good with this, please don't, no analysis on these 5, right? They could indicate that. So, but I still think for us to do our work, if we're going to bring it before standards of assessment, we have to have something to work off in a time frame in order to engage in that.
Deadlines. So like, let's say, we're doing zoology and Jenny has an elephant amendment, right? And she submits to the writing committee. The writing committee comes back and goes, we don't think we want to include this. Jenny has already submitted that amendment. I've been able to see it. And in our standards and assessment committee, we can still talk about the amendment that you submitted about elephants, right? So no one's silenced. It's still there, but at least when we're in our meetings, I'm prepared knowing, what did the writing committee think about this? I've had time to review these amendments, et cetera, right?
And then if it doesn't pass the writing the standards and assessment committee, it still allows that person, and I
To try again at the full board.
But I think by then, I really do think we're putting proactive steps in here on earlier with the 30 days, then again with the 30 days, and then, allowing people to,
well,
before the
and
full
on
board.
that, it says committee reports to the board. 1, a committee agenda item receiving a favorable majority vote of the committee members will be brought to the entire board for consideration with a report and motion from the committee. The motion requires a second, or 2, a committee agenda item not receiving a majority vote of the committee members will be reported back to the entire board with no committee recommendations. The board chair
they then entertain a motion to determine whether a majority of the board wants to hear the item. So the item may be considered immediately. So is that when, let's say, if there is an amendment that wasn't put into that process, that is able to be brought up to the board?
Right, and that has
Is
been.
that right?
That has
I'm
been.
reading this right.
Yeah, but the idea too is that there needs to be a timeline for when you can submit amendments, right? You could still bring one up in that moment, like, right? But if you're bringing 80 amendments, we should be able to have time, staff should be able to have time, response from the writing committee should have time, you know what I mean? To be able, before we're sitting there getting them and then looking at them and trying to decide if we like them or not, right?
And I think we have included
Just
documents
deadlines.
that do have those these passed, these didn't, these passed, these didn't. So what you're saying is true. It's not been the common practice to bring something forward and say, oh, these all didn't pass. Do you want to reconsider those? Usually we bring them forward and say, these passed and these are the direction to go, but it doesn't prohibit someone from saying, these 4 items are ones that I want to.
Right, so the writing committee didn't consider her elephant amendment, but we could still vote on it in standards. It was good. It was a great elephant amendment.
So maybe it's taking past C, the bullet part, staff will forward the revised draft to board members for a 30-day comment period. Board members will get the template, they'll submit it to staff. We would then compile that and bring it sounds like the standards committee, and then standards committee, you guys can either play and accepting or denying those, or you can say, let's just take it to full board, like that would be your guys' decision. Maybe that's the way to play step 10, is now you've got this publicly refined one that the committee has said, here's after public comment, what we would say. At that point, the committee thinks they're done. They're like, this is perfect, it's lovely. You as board members may disagree, and so we'd have that 30-day, one last time period to submit your amendments. And again, people can still bring things up within that 30 days, due to bylaws. But the bulk would come in during that, and we'd be able to have the writing committee respond to those, but you as board members would be making the decision whether those go in, because the additional writing committee submitted would not have those amendments. Does that make sense?
So I think, maybe we're saying the same thing, I'm not sure. And Sarah's, I think, broken it out pretty good, right? Natalie, are you?
Pull those up.
Yeah, I can pull it up. I think after step, I think what I'm hearing, and just correct me anybody if I'm wrong, after it's gone to the public comment in 9, then there's similar 30 days, a notice is given to board members, just like back on, which one was it, 7?
Or 6.
Just like on 7, it would resemble 7, that feedback would come to the Standards and Assessment Committee. And then people could either move motions or not, right? And then that document would go to the full board. Is that what you said?
That's what we could do. I think the big thing is, like you said, people need to be able to weigh in, like, is this the final, to be able to know how many amendments, and so like the number of amendments, it's really arbitrary, right? Like maybe 10 seems too small, but it was a starting.
I think actually, I think,
now it just comes to committee, you submit them.
yeah, this is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like we may have 3, if there may be 400, right? And then we just decided how we're.
And you decide, like, we're gonna debate those here, or we're gonna debate those full board, like, that's where.
This actually adds one more step to it, to have to wait out, well,
Well, this is meant to be like, accept it with minor revisions, we'll do a board meeting, or send it back, there's so much that needs to be done, we need board members to know. What I'm hearing is you want past C, which is board members need to weigh in, and then we come to the final round. So this will add time.
Yeah.
And that's okay, it's like,
Can
we
we,
want quality. Okay.
can we add that as part of the requirement for the writing committee, is that it will have, you'll have one more revision to do after public comment, which is the amendments submitted from the Standards and Assessment.
So what we could do is ask for them to respond to those amendments. Ultimately, they're your amendments. So it might be best for us to say, take that feedback, that last 30-day feedback in step 10 to the writing committee, have them give rationale as to why or why not, or if you're gonna do this, please consider, we're gonna need a unilateral change in language across these 12 papers. Stuff like that, that when we mess with like language here, it's in 6 understand, you know.
Grammatical things, they can say, we're happy to
always
accept this.
technically
we're happy
change.
to accept
That is,
this. Yeah.
like grammar stuff, technical. Those can be done at any time, but content substantial shifts, it's nice to be able to do it in that 30 days, but people who come to the meeting with additional ones won't have had those vetted, and that's just something you all will have to determine, like, how well do you feel, how confident do you feel in accepting ones that haven't had that opportunity? That makes sense.
And do you want any sort of annotation on it, that it, one's gone through this process or the other process? That's something that we had to discuss as staff.
What do you
this
mean
time.
by that?
Meaning, last time, if you remember, we put an asterisk on those that hadn't been vetted by the writing committee. So, because that was always a question, has this been vetted by the writing committee for vertical and horizontal alignment, you know? And so we put an asterisk by it to say, these ones had not been vetted by the writing committee, right? So it didn't have to be asterisks. So do you want
I
that or
would
do you
like
not
them
want that?
to be vetted by the writing committee. I mean, there's still opportunities to bring amendments, but I would like that when we meet as a committee, our amendments have been submitted, and the board can submit some too at that point if they want to, I guess. And the writing committee has given feedback for when we're going through those, so that we know when we're going to the full board. All these amendments, you know, most of these amendments have been vetted by the writing committee. We're having less amendments to evaluate in standards and assessment. And we have that information. This doesn't work with alignment. This, you know, isn't standard practice, or this is wonderful, great suggestion, right?
I respect that. What I feel is happened just a couple times though, and it denies a level of engagement that I think organically and naturally exists. Many books like critical thinking, looking things and use wisdom, and apply things that just flat out maybe overlooked or missed. I mean, and with some of the what was it, the geology one? I met with a few teachers, one in particular, and I said that I laid out all the papers and we went through them, and there was one that I think I can decipher what this one is saying because I'm a teacher. If the teacher saying, I think I can decipher because I'm a teacher, and this amendment that was given was far more clear for them, and that amendment wasn't vetted by the writing committee, that still holds value. It just does. And so I
still
see
do that during those 30 days.
what I
So what
see though
you're-
is that the asterisk.
The asterisk
becomes-
dismisses it.
it creates a bias, an unintentional bias, and a power struggle between if it has an asterisk or not, and I don't respect
Yes.
that.
I
don't value
could just
that.
insert one thing. You may have a higher level of confidence than I do, but without the input of the people that we have hired in the state to be the experts in a content area, without that input, I do not have the confidence as a board member to make a decision.
So then you're saying that you don't have confidence in the teachers that we've personally vetted these standards through and didn't have the opportunity to put through the process, yet it holds validity.
Not if I'm ignoring the people that we asked to give us that.
But I don't
feedback.
think
Not
we're
ignoring.
ignoring.
We're
I don't think
engaging in
that's-
the document.
yeah.
that's been
Not
given.
ignoring, I mean,
Knowing
just,
this is
we
where the
just don't
balance
have it.
Knowing the
This is where the
process we do
argument
to
is made.
picking the writing committee, knowing now that we've gone through how detailed and, you know, that process is. Also, I just am not an expert on all things, and so it's hard for me,
So-
even if I talk to 2 teachers, that's a sample of 2, right?
This
Where
though,
does
what-
it,
It's a
presented?
sample of
Oh,
7
sorry.
people or a sample of 30. When does the number become the number?
Right, but it's
See,
the
it's-
public
it's a
comment,
constant
there's a whole
play
public
of
comment where
numbers.
any
Well, I
teacher, them
talked to-
traveling around the state
I talked
talking
to
to
30
teachers.
teachers and, you know, you talk to 50. Well,
Well, but
Then
they're
it's
traveling,
about
the state,
who
they're
has the
picking
most.
a really
so,
robust, equitable writing committee. They're traveling the state for input. We're putting it out to literally anyone in the world to provide input. At that point, if I still think I know better, I better have a really good reason as to why.
so
And-
what about our constituents? When we were elected to represent our constituents, and if a
Your
huge
constituents don't have
constituency
the
of those that we represent do not agree with what the writing committee has included, then what?
So Natalie, what if the document that's presented, that final document, has the motions on it, it has writing committee comments, it has, I don't know, do you know what I mean? But the fact of the matter is, you'll know because it doesn't have a writing committee comment. Does that make sense? We're not starring it going, these ones, right? And people are looking down there. It's just that we have the comments, we have the recommended final motion. You can look right at the chart and know. You don't have to go, do you know what I mean? If that's the way you want to measure that. But when I think we start putting that asterisk there, we're saying, but only look here, right? And I do think you're right, that we've got some important people on there. We've gathered, some important people. But I think just a chart that just illustrates this is here, and this is what someone's recommending, and people could include the rationale. I don't know that we have to have that on there, but do you know what I mean? And then they can argue that point. Does that?
Yeah, I don't think the rationale should be a required element.
No, I don't think so either. That is, someone could include that if they want.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is because, again, I'm not an expert.
Does that solve that
feedback is so important to me.
And it would be a value for a number of people. So.
Right. But it shouldn't be required.
I think it should be, I think I'm gonna stand.
And it will be required in a document that has the feedback and has the amendments. It will show that it either did or didn't have an analysis.
Okay, so here.
I just-
And the template will do that.
The template can do that.
Yeah, I just see it as that this conversation never ending and just evolving. And
What
there's
conversation?
the conversation that we're having. Well, if the experts, we are here representing hundreds of thousands of people that have that voice, and we are touching base with experts that weren't necessarily hired to be the specific area. And even talking about this is like, oh, she doesn't value the expert. Shouldn't you know that? I'm not saying that at all. I've never said that. I'm saying that there is a level of engagement that is obligated for us to do this, and I want to be able to maintain the integrity of that process for voicing the people, from the people, by the people.
I can say exactly the same thing. I want to maintain the integrity and
I
the
agree.
goodwill. We're on exactly the same
I
page.
think we are too.
I think the question is, am I maintaining the integrity? Are you maintaining the integrity? In however we choose to do it. The only way that I think that we can be safe is when we agree upon a process. When we've agreed, like we are today, on a process, and we say, this is the process, then we live by that process until whatever body, whatever group is working on the process decides they want to change the process, and then we live with that process until we make more changes. But I don't, what about constituents? There are a lot of crazy people that are my constituents. And would I take their word? They can tell me all they want to, that they know better over the people that have passionately given their lives to that field.
This is where the discernment comes in.
Well, and also, I mean, if I had it my way, and this is not even my way. My way would be writing committee, standards and assessment with review, and we would have oversight, look for red flags, and move on and send it to the full board. That is my ideal world that we do not live in. So this allows multiple opportunities for the public, for the board members, for everyone to submit any sort of recommendations or amendments over and over again. There are opportunities to do that. No one is being silenced in this process. But all I'm asking is that we have deadlines and that all of the amendments are vetted by the writing committee before we vote on them. That's all I'm asking.
And if they're included without the vetting, it would just be in a column that just has the amendment.
I would just like to know what the experts think of our amendments.
And if you have nothing there, it would not have the vetting. So
If an amendment comes from an expert, it's an expert against an expert, right? Like that's.
What do you mean an amendment? So many of the
An
amendments that we
expert that's
looked
not
at.
on the writing committee, let's say that.
I would like the writing committee to give us just their, here's what I think about this. This is a great change. We'd love to include this amendment. This wording sounds better, whatever it is, right? This doesn't align. This messes up this thing. We have a whole reason that we teach this part. That's why we have it in here. I need that before I vote on these. And I think it is the most respectful use of our time and our constituents' time and our taxpayers' time to have that before we sit down to decide if they are going to be voted on.
Well, if I may speak, because this is a part that one member Earl knows, I want an efficient process. But to some level, your bylaws don't allow an efficient process. It allows people to bring them at any time. So I think,
Yep.
although it'd be great to have them vetted by the writing committee, we will never have that happen. We will always have standards being brought, amendments being brought to the standards that were not vetted by anyone. And that's where you as 15 board members have to get. That's where you as 15 board members have, it's weird to talk to the air and not all of you. That's where you as 15 board members have to make a decision. How confident do we feel in amendments being brought that haven't been vetted by the? Well, and I think that's your decision, right? And so I don't know that I keep fighting, like,
Does not want to make that
I would
decision.
love to see the
Like
writing
that.
committee see everything. We will be here for 15 years when we do that. So I think to some level, you do your due diligence, you tell people with this 30-day period. But because your bylaws allow people to continue to bring things, we can't get over that aspect unless you want to change your bylaws, which I don't think anyone wants to, because it takes your personal authority away. I think you have that is a risk in this take. And that is where you as board members have to discern how confident do you feel in that standard amendment, knowing it's maybe coming from one person or 5 people or 500 people. That
We'll
doesn't
know
matter.
that, we'll know that, if we have a template, you have an understanding of that, and those, if it's something you value, right, Sarah, then you would identify that immediately. If it's something that you wanna look at it and say, I wanna look at this one a little bit more, it doesn't have the evaluation, but maybe I wanna do some more research on this and see if this amendment, is something I can get behind, then people can do that too. It would be an individual board member's responsibility.
So could we go through my little draft and see what you would add?
Yeah.
Just do the summary.
And it's just to find an example from last night. So members 3 brought forward, did they emphasize or expand on B? So where would that fall?
That's previously the writing committee had written what, we didn't bring anything new. We brought the writing committee part of that. So that would have been under board member Reel's desire, what was the writing committee? That's what the writing committee proposed. So his amendments yesterday were going back to the writing committee. He didn't bring anything new.
We didn't need the writing committee, like Ben said, already had that in one of their drafts.
Okay, so then my second example then in some subject is that member Bogus brought forward the amendment that she did, right?
Yep.
And so that one would fall underneath
A substantial change.
11A or substantial change, but 11A, which is then in law. So we have a process that we can trigger.
Well, when they are,
Which would,
the way that they're interpreting the law, what they mean is you can have core standards outside of PLA now, because they're all listed in the previous code section. Like we have driver education, the board has determined that we should have driver education standards, although the law doesn't require us, to my knowledge, to have those. So when we're talking core standards, core standards are actually defined in code as 6 or 7 subjects. That line is giving you guys the freedom to have them beyond the list that the legislature has provided. And supplemental is not actually in code, but there is a piece of code that says we have to have standards for things that count towards graduation, which supplemental courses do. So that's the nuance of that code section that I think is helpful to know. But you guys can always bring standards, amendments, right? Like that's part of this process. It's the vetting of those that I think has been concerning from board members and staff perspective and the writing committee. Like that messes with our alignment. That doesn't follow the SEEDS protocol. Whoever spoke last night, like there's a very structured part to SEED. There is, right? Most of our standards don't have that tight, like these 3 components and everything. But that part doesn't get to have as much voice when it's at that moment of iteration that no one has seen. So like we've never seen board member August's recommendation, so it didn't have any vetting, and that's where you all as board members say, how confident do I feel in what she's proposing, knowing I haven't seen it, no one has seen it, to be able to like reflect on, to dive into it.
That would be left,
That's where you guys
literally,
are at.
that would be left to 15 people to make the
Exactly.
best decision.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So, and by and large,
Like I tell staff every time.
So I think maybe one solution is I respect you, Emily, you respect me. We can turn to whoever it is that we want to turn to vet, and we'll have to just be happy that everybody's got somebody that they can turn to, or they can do their own personal research or whatever. And we can kindly work together and vote our best conscience based on whatever we choose, whether we're representing our constituents, whether we're, I'm not gonna judge another board member because they're doing their constituents, but I'm not gonna follow what a bunch of my constituents said that we should do, because to be very honest, in a specific instance, they might be crazy. And so whatever it is that however we arrive at our decision, I just know that I don't personally feel comfortable circumventing the process and the professionals, educators that we have put in place. And if you want to go in a different direction and it still fits within the process that we've agreed upon, or the law or whatever, that's great. And we don't have to feel like we have to be upset with or mad at the other people because they're digging in their heels and saying this is the way we ought to do it. But I also have to allow everyone else around the table, all 15, that same right to go ahead and follow whatever, because I believe with all my heart that we have the best intentions and that we all want what's best for kids.
So can I clarify something in your statement, just fairly? And this is what I don't know if it's a form of, it's not gaslighting or when you say that if it doesn't, what I hear you saying is if it doesn't, however, if it doesn't come from the writing committee, that it automatically is determined as considered crazy. Is that true?
No, absolutely not. I did not say that.
That's what I get though. I feel that.
Wow, I'm a poor communicator.
Well, I'm just clarifying. And I want to give you the opportunity to clarify, because that's what I feel like that this conversation spirals to almost every single time, that if something hasn't come through the committee or been vetted by the committee, it's automatically considered crazy or, yeah.
If I just barely said, if you choose to go with your constituents or your group of experts that you've gathered on a given content area, then I have to respect that.
But it won't be respected because it's right.
What won't be? Well, I may not choose to follow it.
But no matter how this comes, if something doesn't come through the writing committee, no matter how it's spun, it won't be respected because it didn't come through the writing.
I think that would
By
be
me, your specific.
No, I'm
individual
just
choice. Yeah.
saying the dialogue that surrounds this conversation, like where we kind of follow in this.
Let's look and see if our process is gonna work. Is that okay?
That's, yes.
And
that's
then
just fine.
if there's still some cleanup to it, if we can, I think if we can, I'm not okay with doing the star thing, but I am okay with creating columns so people can actually visually see and compare, right? They can make that analysis.
What's hard, and I just want to verify, our whole company, we do have deadlines. I respect deadlines and I respect them. I do respect process. You have to have it function. And so my battle is not against not having a process. I just want to clarify that fact. What I'm terrified about is the concept that it's a stronghold, a stranglehold that if we bring something, there is, I do believe, dialogue that automatically is discredited because it hasn't gone through the process. And I'm concerned by that, that it's a very powerful argument that negates a lot of engagement and genuine involvement in quality checks that I feel I bring and other board members bring. And so it's a maintaining of quality there that I would just like to somehow equalize the arguments here.
I mean, honestly, your process doesn't not allow you to bring them late. I think what the problem that people have as board members is they want time to sit with them and they don't get that time. So it's the risk that they're taking when bringing them late. Not that they shouldn't be considered as great as any other amendment, but you've got the risk of people haven't had that time to ponder them and think about them when you're bringing in the thing at the day of the meeting or a few days before. And but that's a risk, but it doesn't mean there's no value or there's a diminished value.
And just because I value the writing committee and the feedback they provide, like, and if you don't,
Thank you.
okay, but if you don't, that seems like this, like, it doesn't matter. You can still bring them. Your amendments are still coming. If you know, your feedback is still submitted. We can still talk about it. I just would like to not show up to a standards assessment meeting, open up an email I got the night before with 90 amendments. And I have no idea what any of the experts think. And it's a subject I have no information on. And I'm trying to be respectful to the educators in my district, to my students, to my parents, and I need to make a decision on this, and I don't feel equipped to be able to do that. And so it is only fair that we allow that time and be respectful to the process. People can still bring things up, but it is not okay for me to be able to make decisions on things on subjects I don't fully understand in that kind of manner. And that's why our meetings go long, is because I'm like, I don't know. And then we're like, Talia, Milo, we're like sitting there trying to do that because, so what I'm trying to do is have that happen before so that I don't have to have that.
And during those meetings, I think it's okay. I like that engagement because it actually helps the public be informed when you have to ask
Right.
questions.
And Chair, I'm a timekeeper in this meeting. I hate to, discussion is amazing, but as a timekeeper, we do need to, we need to, as a committee, ethnic studies is very important to get through this time. So there's 15 minutes left in the meeting. I just
Actually,
checked
we're
on
a quarter after.
12:30. Oh, it says 12 o'clock.
It did say that on the invite, but it wasn't a 3-hour meeting. So
Yeah. So we're going until 12:30. So you guys keep talking.
I do need to leave early.
Studies.
No, I
Yeah.
think,
When
let's,
you need to-
can we go back through what's been done?
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, like,
But but my point is we can take the revision, the vetting process to the next meeting. So that's we've already talked about that. So that agenda item, I wanted to.
We can say that we've gone through step 8 and then we can ponder about this.
here's your option.
And go
Here I'm thinking it's, you can, like, you've approved through, like, I think step 9 was nothing changed. So we're good through step 9. What I can do is bring what I've heard today to either back to committee in August, or we can take step 10, 11, and 12 to full board and finalize this, because they're gonna have to review 1 through 9 anyway. 10 really is saying it goes to the board for a 30-day period. Staff does the writing committee, we bring it back to SNA. SNA does whatever you choose to decide, whether that's, we're gonna go through everybody's amendments, we're gonna just forward these amendments on, you all want to have that decision, and then it goes to full board. That is how I've written up what you have with the, I didn't put an asterisk, but just a note will be made if the amendments came in, not during the period. So if you guys are okay, we could send this on as is, knowing you'll still have time to revise. I guarantee even the parts you change today, you'll have some thoughts between now and August to be like, what about? So totally up to you. That could be 2 options. 1, we come back in August. 2, we take what I've drafted here, knowing you're still gonna have an opportunity for feedback and full board.
I kind of would prefer I just think based on how much, I mean, like, I hardly engage in finance. I hardly engage with law and licensing, but everyone engages in standards. And I almost think that we should just take your draft to the full board and see what
So
everyone
read
thinks in that.
read through it, and if we have any modifications.
So staff submits to the board the amended version of the publicly released draft standards that incorporates the feedback from the public for a 30-day comment period. So you're gonna get the revised guidance on public feedback version, have 30 days to review it. Board members will submit their, I'm gonna put amendments in a staff provided template, because that took us days. Thank you, Andrea and Milo and others. And submit to staff within 30 days of receipt of the request. No amendments will be accepted outside the 30-day. I should probably just remove that because you're obviously going to have amendments that can. The writing committee will review.
Let's just, we ask this question, if it doesn't come in during the 30 days, can we say that it just goes to the full board if you want to, or that's what I'm asking you. If you're gonna submit, it needs to be submitted in the 30 days, or those amendments just go to the full board. I need
What we
feedback
could
on that.
do, like what we could do is put that in when it goes to SNA, is that you guys want to accept amendments in that point, that they can come to the full board. That's one way we can put it, accept the letter.
Although, to me, it resembles 7, but where that one goes to public comment if we don't receive it in enough time. The other one would just go to full board if we don't receive it in enough time, which then it doesn't get vetted in the same way. So I don't know. Thoughts on that? Natalie, Emily?
I would like to just put it off till August, so I have more time to,
We're probably gonna move it to the full board. That's why we're asking. We have to have it ready by September, right?
Yeah, we'll just like testing.
So you're saying we'll bring this to the full board? in
I don't
August?
know. We would have to take a vote on that, but that's,
So I added that if it wasn't received by the right, if it wasn't received before, then it would be forwarded.
um,
So basically
like I said,
there's-
my recommendation would be to bring it back to Standards and Assessment Committee in August. When we've had time to kind of wrap our heads around it a little more.
Yeah, I think we should go full board at this point. I think so many people are gonna be invested in it. We might as well start it there because it's gonna be a long discussion in full board or a long discussion here and then a long discussion in full board. And
well, that's what I'm asking. Is there anything else we would add to this?
no, I think that's a good starting spot.
Okay, what, do you want to finish reading it out?
Yep, so if amendments come after the fact, oh wait, the writing committee will review and respond to each board member's amendments submitted within the 30-day period. If amendments come after the 30-day period notification process, then a note will be made within the amendment report that it wasn't reviewed by the writing committee and would be forwarded to the full board for consideration. And then step 11 is the Standards and Assessment Committee will review the amendments compiled from the board members and evaluate whether to review each or pass the amendments onto the full board for review and approval. And then the full board will review the amendments compiled with the board members at step 10 and 11 and evaluate whether to review each or pass the amendments to finalize the approval of the standard. They probably need to change that little last one there because they need to review each.
Sounds good to me.
Is that a motion? Motion to pass these on, so I can share down.
It has to be approved, yeah. Oh, yeah, you've got till August to make the adjustments. Jennifer, when you get it all tidied up, you just get it out to us early.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah, you got this. Checks into it.
It's just the big picture. I'm a big picture person, and then there's the nuts and bolts part. Not as great at that part.
Here is would be the final motion, so it would be. Which this one would like to, or revise that. I can do it. Well, 13 is the implementation. Oh, you're right. 13. Yeah, there's always that last piece.
Yeah. I'll make a motion that the committee approves the revised core standards revision process, steps 1 through 13, as amended and forward the full board for approval.
Okay, can I comment?
Please.
So that makes it look like we approve instead of just we're putting it forward to the board for their approval.
Yeah,
Because
what if
we
we had-
haven't agreed or approved on this. We're just approving to move it forward to the board for theirs, not that we've approved it.
So,
Right.
or maybe to the full board for input and approval. So say draft 1 as amended and forward to the full board for input and approval.
It still says the committee, let's see, committee approves the revised core standards revision process. So it still says we approve it.
So instead of approve, the committee moves, something like
Yeah.
that, right?
No, yeah, the upload, yeah. The committee moves the revised core standards revision process, steps 1 through 13, draft 1 as amended, and forwards the full board for input and approval.
As amended for full board input and approval.
Then all of you would see it as draft, but it was as draft one, and it would be a
Yeah.
draft two.
I would say for, as amended for input from the full board.
Sure,
Just or
sure.
as in,
So after it says as amended for input from the full board.
So we need to add in a forward, like the committee moves the revised core standard revision process steps 1 through 13 draft 1 forward as amended for input, or as amended forward something forward as amended for input from the full board. Or whatever.
I would take out input, because it says input here, right? As amended for input from the full board or final.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You have to say, I only have teacher evaluation, so I'm gonna go try to do that one. Robert's here from me and Etienne. I was hoping to be here all the things.
Okay, got a motion on the floor. Have we got it? Neat enough that we're ready to vote. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Are you okay, Natalie?
No, I'm,
Okay.
I still think it should come back to the committee, but
All right. So, one opposed. Remember Klein. All right. So now, are we doing the core guide
So we
2.7?
would skip that one because it's
Okay.
not time sensitive. And
All
then
right,
move to.
so our final action item is 2.8 ethnic studies standards analysis.
I'm sorry, I have to go. I have a hard stop hitting the
Okay.
road here in a few minutes, so
All right,
thank you.
thank you, Natalie. Who would be speaking to the ethnic studies?
You will be great
Oh,
speech
it's on-
on Zoom.
it's on mine.
She's got a cold and she didn't want to share it with you, so.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana Coley-Mells, and I'm the Ethnic Studies Education Specialist in Teaching and Learning here at USBE. May I share my screen for presentation?
Please.
Is it through Zoom or the room code?
Since you're on Zoom, you need to share it through Zoom.
I do not have permission.
Jerry gave everybody permission. So, sure.
It says you cannot start sharing your screen if other participants are sharing.
So maybe we need to have to stop sharing.
Great, Jennifer left.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Hey, can you share now, Eva?
1 second. Yes. can you-
There we go.
Okay, so today we'll be talking about ethnic studies, an analysis that was done, and along with what are some next steps. So for this, I'm just going to briefly go over some key definitions to keep in mind, the purpose of this work, some tasks that are outlined for the board in the legislation that goes along with this, along with the analysis done over the core standards, and 3 questions that staff has for next steps. So the definition of ethnic studies is the interdisciplinary social and historical study of how different populations have experienced and participated in building the United States of America, including the study of culture, history, and the contributions of Utahns of diverse ethnicities. Utahns of diverse ethnicities is defined as an individual who has residence in Utah, is Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic or Latino, Black or African American, Asian or Asian American, or from a diverse background or experiences. Throughout the presentation, I do shorten it to UDE because it's quite long. So the purpose of this work is to ensure representation throughout our core standards and in public education to foster a sense of belonging and to build cultural knowledge for students. So this work comes out of Senate Bill 244 from 2022. And throughout this bill, there is tasks that are assigned to the Utah State Board of Education and to an Ethnic Studies Commission. So the board is charged with incorporating ethnic studies into the core standards based on some minimum considerations that are outlined throughout the bill, to propose standards to the Ethnic Studies Commission for review and make recommendations, and to make a board rule to assist LEAs to have guidelines and methods for including curriculum and instructional materials that align with these standards and have a reporting process. So for today, we're going to mostly focus on the first task in bullet 1 to incorporate those standards and looking at those minimum considerations, and briefly touch on the second bullet point. Additionally, there's the Ethnic Studies Commission that's working alongside of this work, and they've been doing an excellent job with reaching out to stakeholders in the community and hearing different stories and contributions of Utahns of diverse ethnicity, which is they're charged with first. They're also charged to advise on issues that impact Utahns of diverse ethnicities, and then to make recommendations to recognize their contributions, such as making policy recommendations to the governor or recommendations to the legislative body for future bills. Besides that, they are also charged with consulting with the Utah State Board of Education to review their proposed standards that are submitted and to give recommendations to the board on those proposed standards. So as part of the first task of Utah State Board of Education to incorporate those standards, the bill asks that there be certain criteria that is considered at a minimum. And with that, staff has conducted an ethnic studies analysis of core standards to see how we meet those minimum requirements, which you'll be able to see in detail in backup. But the themes of that criteria is: one, is there a sense of cultural awareness? Are there certain character traits identified in any of the core standards? Are there opportunities to recognize and incorporate Utahns of diverse ethnicities? And is there a sense of ethnic studies where there's an interdisciplinary social and historical study that happens based off of those standards? So this is looking at only the core standards across 7 subject areas, and those ended up being totaling around 3,154 standards that were reviewed in total to see if they meet these 4 minimum requirements. Approximately 600 met those minimum criteria in whole or in part. So 221 standards out of that 3,000 met all 4 themes across those 7 content areas. Almost 400 standards met at least 1 or up to 3 of those themes identified above throughout the 7 content areas. Beyond this, staff also looked at if with some enhancement, if any standards out of that 3,000 would be able to meet the criteria with just some slight verbiage change to be more specific. And we found that about 271 standards had potential with slight verbiage change to meet that minimum requirement. So here is a visual of what that analysis looked like, looking at the 7 content areas, which is social studies, English language arts, fine arts, math, science, physical education and health, and breaking it into elementary grades K through 6th grade and 7th grade to 12th grade. We can see here that social studies has the most standards that meet those minimum criteria, both in elementary and secondary. Then is fine arts, followed by physical education, health, English. For math and science, elementary math did not have any standards that specifically reference any of the minimum requirements, and that's just simply how elementary math is written. And elementary science had 2 standards that aligned there. In terms of looking at the visual for the standards that had potential, the most potential is actually seen in elementary math with that slight verbiage change. There are multiple standards that ethnic groups like Black American appeared 3 times, and other terms were looked, but they did not appear at all. These are the only terms that appeared throughout those standards. So there is some potential gaps and areas to improve on the verbiage and examples that are used within the current standards to ensure representation across Utahns of diverse ethnicities here. And this brings me into part of the 3 questions that we have for you today. The first question is there an interest to further develop ethnic studies beyond the currently identified aspects of ethnic studies that I've presented to you here today, and those that have potential? Staff has also took some time to think about what some potential options may look like going forward. So option A would be to accept what we've currently identified as having the minimum requirements to be our ethnic studies that then receive review and recommendations from the Ethnic Studies Commission. Option B would be to enhance what's already been identified to be more explicitly ethnic studies, and to ensure representation of Utahns of diverse ethnicities. So it's more about going beyond those just minimum requirements that are outlined in Utah code. Option C would be to enhance 1 or 2 content areas or subjects to explicitly include integrated approach to ethnic studies. This might look like focusing just on social studies and English language arts, or social studies and fine arts, or whatever the best option may be. The 4th option would be to enhance all content areas, so all 7, to have an integrated approach to ethnic studies standards and that support the representation of Utahns of diverse ethnicities. So this would be looking at social studies, English language arts, fine arts, math, science, physical education, and health. So here I'm going to pause for questions before reading the next 2 questions, if that is okay.
And Tiana, I'm wondering if you could show the committee the spreadsheet that the committee worked with, the commission worked with, in looking at the standards to be able to say, here's a standard that was identified, here's why, and then I think there was a column in there that would show what word could be added or that would make that change, easily make that change.
So in the spreadsheet that was included in board backup, it doesn't have the specific change. This was just a simple analysis of where there is opportunity or not, and to then ask the board for how they would like to proceed with this information. So in breaking it out, it just simply says, does it align with the different themes based off of the different standards in their categories? Strand.
Can you make it just a little bit bigger so they can see what that would look like as a yes, no? All right. Okay.
So when are you ready for questions? I actually have a couple proposed motions. They're not here. I'll tell you what those are in a minute. I'm a little confused at how we proceed. And what I mean by that is we just finished ELA. We just finished social studies. They have a very regimented program that we just went through. This law was in place. We applied principles of that law to these standards. So it's that onesie, twosies, like we don't go in and just go scrub here, change this word, change that word. As a matter of fact, I won't use the board member's name, but I got quite a bit of feedback from a board member this last week that was concerned that when we use specific language, that we are cornering our teachers. So I'm trying to balance that out and saying, when are we stepping over and when are we in line? And then at what point do we, when we redo, I guess here's my motion.
Wait, before you.
Okay, go ahead.
So, great presentation.
Yeah.
Love this.
Yep.
It's so clear. I have no question. It was great. But what if our biggest area that she identified as improvement is math? So one improvement we could do is going into these math standards is look for opportunities to
That actually is
increase
the
our
motion.
numbers. Oh, well, that's so cute.
Well,
Okay,
not
great.
exactly like that, but it's
Yes.
similar. We address what I would recommend that the board and we do is that as the core items come up, I know we may have to ask for a change in the law. Quite simply, it says it wants everything integrated by 2024. The reality is that is so unrealistic for our LEAs to say, change your curriculum, change it, right? Go in and move, we're gonna change this word, this word, and this word. And now, because we already know that once you have those set, you have so much that goes behind putting those out, that just to say, okay, change this, change this, change this, and now we've done ethnic studies, or now we've done whatever you want to put into it. It just, the reality of that, are we asking them to take on new curriculum? Are we asking, do you know what I'm saying? This is
Right.
where it gets concerning to me, that what are we really doing to our LEAs? So this is the recommendation, and this is what I would suggest we put forward, is that as we update our course standards, we take into consideration what those requirements are, what did you call them? The criteria that's in the law, and we just take those into consideration as we're moving through.
Is that something we can ask the writing committee to take into consideration as well?
Because that would be part of the law, that would fall under that, the same as civics care, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
those other
right.
components of the law. The other thing I'm actually recommending we do, and maybe we can invite the Ethnic Studies Coalition to do this with this, and I would make a motion that we took a field trip as a standards and assessment. I know, sounds fun, huh?
Better be in a bus.
Well, I'll bring my white van,
Okay.
which is like a bus.
Yeah.
That we do a field trip and we go visit with some actual LEAs, actual superintendents, and see what they're doing. Because in some ways, when I've talked to LEAs, I don't know. I've seen ethnic studies in other states. I guess what I'm saying. I've seen it in California. I've seen it in Minnesota. I know what it looks like there. From what I understand from the way they want to implement ethnic studies in the state of Utah, and Eva, you could tell me if I'm incorrect in this, they were trying to be thoughtful, not to get into the political nature, but to be thoughtful about the communities. And that was the sense I had. So I want to see what's out there before we try to say no one's doing it, or making an assumption that we don't have a variety of resources already, so that we can report back and say, we know what's there, we know what's going on, and I just, so that we have a feel for what's going on the ground level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And the base level. And the other recommendation. So I would recommend that as we upgrade our core standards, we implement the pieces of the law there.
Research.
But to go back and do it, to me, especially where we just did our ELA, I don't even understand what that means, especially after just doing these supplemental standards. Do you know what I mean? Do we have to bring the whole standards back? Do we have a process for that? To me, that's very concerning and messy, and not just politically messy, but it's, are we opening the standards back up for anything? Does that make sense? Because we have a process that we do, and if we're not careful, we end up saying the process is we're going to follow the process here, but not here. We're going to make exceptions, and we can change whatever we want here. And that just, to me, that's very concerning, because then we're opening it up for things that aren't thoroughly vetted. We don't have a writing committee. Do you know what I mean? All those kind of components. So as standards come up, we do that. And then what was it? I think we take a field trip, and I'll make the arrangements. I'll provide you milk and a sack lunch. So, hold on, let me look at my notes.
I mean, I'm looking at this chart, which is
And
so
we
great.
have to report
There's so
back,
much opportunity.
Eva,
Yeah.
but I would just recommend to our report back that we explain to the Ethnic Studies Coalition the standards revision process, which I think has been done before, but I think it's worth, do we have to report back when? Is that soon? When are they meeting again?
So we have to report back. Etiana, do you want to give a timeline in both reporting back now and then what needs to happen in August?
Yes, so right now, on June 15th, a meeting has just been scheduled for the Ethnic Studies Commission at the Capitol. That meeting will be another listening session, so they are not expecting a submission at that point, but the general timeline that has been discussed is that once there's been a draft of guidelines, that's task 3. So just so you can see as I go, task 3, once there's a draft of guidelines and board rule, which we're looking at for August, that in the fall that if we are ready, we would submit our proposed standards to the commission so they can start their review process.
Okay. That wording is so odd. We're completely out of line when I'm not suggesting what you said, but the idea that we're submitting our standards to them for them to, so what I'm saying is, what if they make recommendations? What does that mean? Does that make sense? Because now what, do we reopen up our standards process and form another writing committee? And so there's pieces to this law that need to be cleaned up, and that might be what we need to address too, right?
That is question 2.
Okay. And that is the exact thing, right? How do we clean
You don't
this
want the
up?
legislature to act like a standards and assessment committee and go through and just.
Well, there's even one more piece to this, and maybe Eva, you're gonna hit on this too, is that it requires local LEAs to submit evidence that they are complying with the requirements in here. We don't have in other words, we're checking on their curriculum. Does the legislature do that? Do we do that?
It sounds like.
So there's some overreach elements here that we need to be asking about what they really want that to look like. Eva, I wonder if they've suggested to you that they want samples? Is that what they want of evidence from the LEAs?
No, the reporting aspect. So again, this is part of the 3rd task for USBE. It's not a task for the Ethnic Studies Commission. So within making a board rule that, again, we're looking at a timeline to have that draft for August, is 1, to have developed guidelines for LEAs to start selecting instructional materials that align with the course standards that we're proposing, and for them to have methods to select those materials. And then there needs to be a report to the board on what materials they have selected. The language in the bill also allows for flexibility for LEAs to be able to, they don't just have to select it once, and then if they don't meet the criteria, it's like, oh no, you've messed up. It allows flexibility for them to continue to select and modify if needed materials so that they can stay in alignment with the Utah Code and the standards that are identified as being ethnic studies that are integrated within all the core standards.
So they're going to submit all their curriculum to us for us to say whether or not it meets the criteria. And if it doesn't, then we will let them know, and then they'll get new curriculum. I'm just asking, this isn't a criticism. I hope you understand that. I'm trying to understand what our obligation is.
Yes, in theory, that's how it would work. At this point, we don't have the drafted guidelines and methods and reporting process in place yet. That is what will become with the board rule. We're still kind of at that first step of, okay, first step is we identify at least at a minimum what is there. And then it goes into, okay, now that we've identified that we have something, what would you like to do next to evolve? Robert, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm Robert Austin, the Humanities Team Coordinator. Make sure that there's in the statute, it says that we need to make rules regarding process for the guidelines for LEAs. So there is a rulemaking. So yes, this is a complicated bill, obviously. Because it's almost like a parallel track. There's this, what's the role of the commission? And the commission has been great. I mean, there's nothing, there, we're, it's all about, and I think if we can keep our eyes on the prize, representation is important. We know that. How do we make that happen? What's the best way forward? It's not too onerous for LEAs. It makes sense regarding a timeline, and that fits within all of the work we just did over the last few hours in terms of the standards process. That's all of part of why we're coming here today, is to help you kind of see the complications.
So we could make some recommendations and legislatively, because there are some things in here that are gonna need to be cleaned up, right? The 2024 thing. Yeah, they're just, right, because we won't even review some of these core standards for maybe another 2 years. Would that be accurate? So we need to maybe ask for a flexibility, or maybe striking that commitment, or maybe just says as core standards come up,
That seems like it
consideration
makes
to
sense.
take it,
Yeah.
something like that.
There's also, if I may, another route the board could take. So as Etiana was showing with them, there's different ways to be able to include them. One, the board could include them as they come up. Another approach would be to say we have 3 overarching standards, and just making sure that we mention that they're mentioned throughout every content area, whatever that looks like. And so that then could meet the need of the August 24th deadline. So there's different routes, but if this is the route, then it would require the legislature.
But I also think, and maybe it's a matter of digging deeper into this law, but I do think that, and maybe, Robert, you figured out how to do this. I'm concerned that they're required to submit their curriculum, and someone is going to be giving the thumbs up. This is ethnic studies, this is not. That just seems, do we do that on anything else?
Not to my knowledge.
And I know on sensitive materials, we kind of got this, right? And yet we have some laws that say you're going to do some things with that. So I'm trying to understand why we would wade in so far here, but on other ones where they're saying local control.
The possible precedent would be the Instructional Materials Commission process. So we could review materials during that process and recommend and say these are in alignment with the completion of ethnic studies. But in terms of actually having someone and then having us say yes or no.
And then what happens if it's a no, and is there an appeals process? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Then we get really, or is there corrective action?
It does make sense that they pass legislation without thinking through these things.
So those are things to ask,
Yeah.
right?
When does fine arts come up? Any fine arts classes as well?
I'd have to look at that. Get into that timeline, but I mean, the one, sorry, but I do think that the idea of saying, you know what, this is a lens that we want to make sure we've included. I mean, in terms of making sure that we are as representative as possible in our standards, so that,
So then that brings me back to the first question, which would be the motion that we do a field trip. Because if we're assuming something, and what I mean by that is we're assuming that things are not there, people aren't represented. So in going out and asking districts, where can we be a benefit to you? And then putting it, and then as a group, looking back at this and saying, now where do we sit within this? So
I
something like
wonder
that.
if part of our standards process, we include something that's like an ethnic studies check or something, you know what I mean?
Well, then
Like,
we also, then we're back to, we have to include civics education, because that's,
Yeah.
and we have to include, right, there's a lot of things we would, which we can do that, but then,
I know I brought up this code
Yeah.
during ELA.
Yeah.
Like I was like, we had those discussions, like,
Right.
why are we including this? And I think it was Naomi was like ethnic studies, we need it for that requirement or whatever. And so that was like a really easy answer. And so, but I just kind of wish there could have been ways we could have integrated it more in a lot of the ones we just went through, but we didn't have that as part of our process. So
even part of the process, because the writing committee, right, they were, well, I don't know, right, on the
But
ELA, but they knew they were able to incorporate it.
22.
Yeah.
ELA started way before that, right?
But it was part of the discussion, because I've heard it, and the
Mhm.
same with the social studies, they've mentioned it too. So it's not like it was missing from the
I
discussion.
just wonder if the commission and the legislature would appreciate to know
Okay,
that we have a check in our process for
Okay.
that, so that we are ensuring that we are, you know, integrating it appropriately. Maybe that will give them.
The other thing to consider is if it's about when standards come up, the cycle right now is about 7 years of when it comes up, 10 years to completion. So it's the 7 years, and then we have the 3 years of it going through this entire process. It's about 10 years before a lot of those content areas are reconsidered. So if there's a view or a, you know, whatever that looks like, a rubric or, you know, a recommendation of looking at things, whatever that looks like, then that's something that this direction staff can create what that looks like, bring it back. I think moving forward, that August deadline is a quick deadline. So just needing to understand what is it that you want, and if you're already going to be asking for an extension of or reconsideration of, but then what do we do to fulfill what you can?
I think there's a lot of questions for the legislators, really, right? For that commission, what does this look like? What is your intent? Do you want to be measuring curriculum or not? This says it. It doesn't just hint at it. It provides evidence like you're doing this, and then, you know, so
I feel like JLC would have a lot of thoughts about if they're doing that with curriculum.
yeah. No, we don't meet with them. That's what I'm saying. Let's go on a field trip. That's all I for. What do we have to decide today? Because we're down to just a few minutes, right? But she's a Eva. You don't have anything for this. Oh, she's reporting this month.
Is that right? Well, why don't we just say we're gonna do all 3 of Jenny's?
So I typed them up.
Okay.
Wait, and Tiana,
And I think we should,
had some additional questions.
I think we should include the process part, because I think that might be
So
helpful.
this is what I did have. I can send this. I just have. I had an E, but maybe it's more of the A. As core standards are. I'll just send this to you. Yes, I put your name on it. Just haven't sent it. It just says, now that I sent it, I just sent it to Randy. Sent items. There we go. Just some thoughts here. So as core standards are updated, the state board address the components of the ethnic studies law, right? That's I can't see us doing anything else unless we change our process, because we can't go in and just remove things without saying, okay, we got to go to the writing committee, we got to bring it to the board, all that kind of stuff. And then presentation of the ethnic studies may explain the process for standards revision. Staff pull a few of the examples from ELA and social studies so they can share. Are they requiring, this is the other question, are they requiring all of our standards that have ethnic studies before them and they give us an okay?
No,
Is this
at this point, they're not requiring that.
okay, so we can show examples of how it's been implemented. Is that accurate?
But she has a spreadsheet here that has every single time.
I know, but that's what
If you hand that over to them, that feels
Well,
like.
and Eva has actually
Yeah.
already presented to the Ethnic Studies Commission much of this information to say.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting because in some cases, the commission, some members were concerned that, wait a minute, you've moved forward before we even started our work. And the reality is, of course, that all standards writers have for years tried to think about how do you diversify the standards. So even an emphasis on trying to be more inclusive has predated the creation of the ethnic studies.
Yeah.
Of course.
And that's what I heard from districts. They're like, I'm not sure what you're asking us to do really, because our curriculum has been incorporating many different people for more than 20, 30
I
years.
guess other than women.
So-
You were on there, I was like, what the
And
heck?
and Eva put that on as a comparison. so
Yeah.
she could see. The other piece though is that question about urgency. If we feel like there is an urgency in terms of correcting some areas where there needs to be more inclusion, then a 10-year time frame is a long time. That's whole generations of students who don't necessarily see themselves represented. And
So that
there may be some opportunities.
So once again, that goes back to, is that happening, or is it just the standards aren't specifically saying you have to do this? Are they already doing it? So that's where I'm saying, are we doing it already? And now we're trying to correct something that I don't know, that, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
So, but I think she could, the other thing is the number of standards and how many are included, right? That's an important thing. And then, share what is coming next. We have math coming next. That one's keyed up to start soon. And maybe there's a couple others that are keyed up to start within a year. I can't remember. I'd have to look back at so we just, I don't know what's next after that, but we could speak to what's coming, right? So they're familiar with that. And then I put feedback from our field trip. Review examples of curriculum, right?
Right, and then I do think the curriculum piece is really critical. Of course, there are standards, but curriculum is really where the rubber meets the road. And it's not really the purview of the central assessment committee or the board in terms of the curriculum, except for that kind of weird.
That's right, and that's the argument
right,
that our districts, and maybe someone from, from, not JLC, from USDA or something can,
And if they did go through the instructional materials instead, like if that was the point, then there would be something that state, diverse populations or whatever it is, and if not, we still just.
Yeah. And then just any recommendations we might have for legislation, or even asking that there's some complications with the law itself. If even we're able to bring that up. For example, the 2024, is that full implementation of all core standards? And then that really we've got some problems because we just can't do that. So I just acknowledging that there's some problems within the law itself that might need to be addressed. So.
I've written that down as a
Okay.
motion.
Okay, do you want me?
Did you include, I
Okay.
didn't catch if you included, with math standards coming up.
I did have, share what is coming up next for standards and the timeline for actual application.
Yeah, okay, so I don't know if it's like, will be, if we need to be like, with this one coming up, we're going to be considering and making sure we're increasing our, I don't know.
Well, I put actual application, but is there something?
I wonder, like, going to the commission, being like, and we're going to be looking at the math standards and making sure we integrate, because it is the place with the most opportunity, we expect these numbers to increase, you know what I mean? Or something, like something that just makes
Yeah, I
them
don't
feel
know.
a little
I
bit
guess
more
you can take what she
secure
found
about-
there. I don't know. I'm not sure what that looks like in math, so that's why I'm having a hard time visualizing
Actually,
the
for
problems.
example, mathematics could simply
Easiest
be
one.
that there
It's
are
easiest.
lots of
Yeah.
many different ways that different cultures address mathematics and think about it in terms of mathematics. So there are some explicit ways you can enlarge that story a little bit. But
Okay.
again, it's.
Okay.
My master's was on ethnomathematics, so the culture of math never, math.
Well, but
we have very
that's
different-
different than, exposing to the culture of different.
Yeah.
Right, versus, the teaching of the functional concepts is not the same, but where algebra came from, right? Or
There's
that kind
also
of
some
thing.
very, very simple things. And we do this in test driving when we have it go through review for our biases. Is that the
Biases.
yes? And what happens is even just what are the names? Just including names from different cultures and whatnot.
But that
It's
is
very- yeah.
curriculum, and I worry that,
But
and
this is
that's where,
standard.
that
Yeah,
once
yeah.
again, I say, let's look at some curriculum before we make the assumption that we're
That it's not.
having them to, because
Yeah.
otherwise we're assuming something, and then we're requiring something that districts are gonna be uncertain. They're gonna be like, did we not do that? I just think
Yeah, what's
there's some thoughtful
considerations and
conversation
what's
there,
law
yeah.
and what's- yeah. So this is what I had. Let's see if that's what you wanted.
Okay, so the board approves the process that as core standards are updated, the board addresses the concept and studies law. Explain process.
This is just for reading.
Okay, then that's the rest of it.
So the only thing that I messed
Patty,
with.
do you want even to stop sharing and then you yours in there?
Sure. Or at least that gives
then
Eva some direction for this next month,
Well,
right?
Yeah, and then that shows the public what you're proposing.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
I just think this is like a typical case of the legislature thinking it's super easy to just do this thing, and it's like, you don't understand how we work. And so like trying to expect us to go back on those standards is absolutely unrealistic.
There's an overlap of
Yes,
things.
but possibly either fixing the law or letting the legislature know, when they come up, we will be implementing this part and
That's right.
yeah, so I think that's fair.
I'm sure they'll let us know.
I'm sure they will.
Okay, what?
And they better put a fiscal note on it. If they want us to go back and go through all the standards, then they better put a fiscal note on that bill.
Yeah.
Big fat fiscal note, okay?
Think about it.
Yeah.
Motion.
Okay. I'll have to go over here. Motion that the committee, are we moving this to the board? So the board's gonna approve this? Oh, hold on a second. Eva, you need direction though this month, don't you?
I need direction. It says before the school board takes a formal action.
That would, yeah.
So this past time we'd asked leadership.
Wait, okay, but you need direction for August or for June? Do you see what I'm saying?
It would be helpful, extremely helpful to have a general idea at least for June to discuss.
Okay, so
Should
this
get
is
it
the
in
For August.
okay,
Can we add one more that says, look for possible ways to integrate an ethnic studies component to our standards process? Or is that already?
Consider integration.
Consider, yeah. Consider ethnic studies.
Or criteria.
Criteria, standard criteria.
you want to be
Process.
Sure, may I just interject? It may be that the statute, because the statute requires that would be similar to like which we use civic and education as a lens in our.
So if we're, and we may have to consider this next month, so if we are being specific on this in our process, then we need to be specific if there are other laws in our process too, right?
But for her to just take it.
Right,
yeah,
no,
okay.
yeah,
But I agree
no,
with that.
yep. Okay, so the committee approves the process that as core standards are updated, the board addresses the components of ethnic studies law. I think that's the only real way we can deal with this. Number one, explain process of standards and revision timelines framework. 2, staff pull a few of the examples from ELA standards and social studies standards to share with the committee and elements incorporated from the law. We have 3,000, well, then the numbers, right? So we have 3,154 core standards, 617 in whole are part addressing ethnic studies, show percent of the elements addressed. So consider ethnic studies criteria as part of the standards review process, share what is coming up next for standards and the timeline for actual application. Then 6 is feedback from our field trip to review examples of curriculum, and then recommendations for legislative changes. There is something I want to ask because it is a math question. When we talk about let's just say there are 14 standards that meet the criteria in ELA. Let's just say that. The problem you have in using that number is you may have 20 standards total in ELA, and we have 14, that's well over 50%. But in social studies, you may have, let's say 600. I know we don't have that many because we're trying to reduce them. So if 600 and we have 100, even though it's a lot, it's not percent. I guess what I'm saying is I think we need to look at ratio.
Well, they don't have a really good scoring.
But it's
way.
really, then it begs the question, are we asking for quotas? And if we're asking for quotas, we're getting into a really weird space where like, you didn't meet the quota so all I'm saying is we have to be careful with the numbers game that we don't misinterpret data in a way that's not accurate, but then we're also not trying to force a quota on our districts for something either, but we're saying, we're doing our best. Here's where we're at, just so they know. Does that make sense? So we're not we're not misrepresenting information, but we're also not trying to force a quota in a way that would be harmful when we're over emphasizing something. We want to make sure it's there. We want to make sure it's implemented, but not so.
Wording from the statute.
Opportunity. So we want to create opportunities.
Yeah. That's directly from the statute. Consider, so do we say, I'm just gonna put it
What if
down
we
here.
just say request commission to outline?
Consider
Opportunities to
it here.
yeah. Consider opportunities. That, I think that's, is that just one way to
Recognize and incorporate.
Yeah.
And then just for the rest.
Well, you guys are just looking at time. Staff is asking about how much longer will be, because you guys have your other meeting at 1, so we want to give you a minute of a break. So.
We're not too much longer. Yeah.
We'll do this
We have
motion.
not another, yeah.
Did you have other questions
I don't
for us to
know.
answer?
I don't know.
One final, very quick question. It
Okay.
should cause very much discussion. I simply would like to know, with what the bill says, with before the board takes formal actions and that they have to submit something to the commission. The question is who? Would you like staff who's already been communicating with the commission to submit whatever is decided, or would it like to be in some other formal capacity through the board?
Okay. You can, oh, yeah. I'll do it. Or Randy.
I think it's an official capacity because
Yeah.
it's approved by all of you. It's not approved by staff. So if
Yeah.
it comes from staff, it doesn't look like it has the board stamp.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The
A
answer is
board member can
board
do it.
members, yeah. Etiana, can you help create that document of what it says to go through, so we can have the outline of this and then maybe work with board member Earl on what that says? Okay.
Was there one more question?
No, we got through all three.
Okay, so do we need to formalize this motion now? Board member Earl, the motion is that the committee approves the process that as core standards are updated, the board addresses the components of the ethics studies law. Okay. So that's what we're voting on. Any
Yeah.
further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous.
Thanks for thinking that through before we talked. That was helpful. And Eva, amazing presentation, outlined
No,
the
thank you,
data,
Eva.
all of the documents you gave us were like, whew, amazing. Nice work.
Well, we'll be seeing more of this.
And we'll have to, correct me if I'm wrong, Eva, it might give us something to think about. We have to create some kind of a recommendation for district, what do they call it? Guidelines and methods, right? For them to use the criteria.
Yes, which will be part of the board rule. Along with that, will outline what that reporting process looks like as the bill is currently outlined.
Okay, so that's something that we would bring back on. Okay, so if we wanted to weigh in on that, then we would reach out to staff.
It'll come to committee in August for, right, with the rule, so it's, I mean, if you wanna reach out in advance, sure, but it will done like tomorrow.
Okay. All right.
Right? So this meeting is adjourned.